Hello guys, this is Naruto-kun and we are back with our new fanfic, which is What If Naruto Fell in Love with Shizuka Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and please subscribe to the channel. It motivates me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. Now let's start the fanfiction. Uzumaki Naruto was asleep in his house, an odd factor considering the fact that it was already noon and everyone in the village was already up and bustling. However, he was comfortable in the shelter of his own house. Things were back to normal after the Fourth Shinobi World War, and Naruto could not ask for anything more. He had finally managed to bring back his teammate, Uchiha Sasuke, and the allied shinobi forces had emerged victorious in the war against Uchiha Madara. To put the icing on the cake, Naruto had finally fulfilled his long-standing promise to Sakura-chan, the one he had made years ago whilst the two were still genin, and now, things were completely different. Yes, they were completely different. It wasn't because Sakura was a chunin now while he and Sasuke still remained genin. No, that was a minuscule matter, since both Naruto and Sasuke had already reached the peak of their abilities whilst in the war. Naruto had unlocked his full potential as Jinchuriki, while Sasuke had unlocked his full potential as an Uchiha. The two were already stronger than Kakashi and most of the other Junin in the village at this point. The only person who was on their level was probably the Hokage, Tsunade. What really got to Naruto was the fact that he had brought Sasuke back, and now there was nothing that stood between him and confessing his long-standing love for his pink-haired teammate, Haruno Sakura. Thoughts of the girl filled his head and Naruto turned his head in his sleep. A small smile had broken on his face, and he started wondering why he had fallen so in love with Sakura-chan. Sure enough, she was extremely attractive, her green eyes light a fire in his soul like none he had ever experienced before, and her pink hair added to her boundless beauty. This, however, did not mean that she was the prettiest girl in Konoha. Heck, even the special Junin, Mitarashi Anko, was extremely attractive, and she had a killer rack to brag about. It wasn't anything superficial such as her appearance. Sakura was also strong. In fact, she was the second strongest kunoichi in the village after Tsunade. Her medical skills were also something to write home about, since she had unlocked the Byakugo seal on her forehead in the war. It only added to her strength. Naruto still felt the undying need to always protect her though, even if at that point in time she kept insisting that she was perfectly fine on her own. Still, he rarely left her to her own devices, and it required her own violence to actually keep him away from her long enough for her to carry herself in her own way. Naruto was in love with Sakura ever since that day on the bench. When him and Sasuke had been newly formed as Team 7, and he disguised himself as Sasuke to go and talk to Sakura. It was at that point that Sakura had confessed to Naruto as Sasuke, that all she wanted was to be acknowledged by him. That made him realize why he liked her so much. She was the same as him, in that both of them sought acknowledgement, her from the Uchiha and him from the village that had detested him so much since he was a kid. Since that point, Naruto had put his best foot forward and tried to woo the girl. There was some progress, since Naruto had seen her shed tears for him on several occasions, plus how she healed him time and time again even when her chakra levels were dangerously low. However, something in Naruto still told him that he still could do more for her, and this was the thought that kept on pushing him to always stay by her side. He had decided to confess to her after the war, but once they had returned to the village he simply could not find the time to talk to her in person. This was because she spent most of her time in the hospital healing all the casualties from the war who were from Konoha. They were quite a number, and since Sakura had been promoted to the head of the medical corps, she always had to be in the hospital to oversee the medical care of all the patients. Tsunade herself could not assist her, since she was up to her neck in her duties as Hokage, and could not even spare any time to go and check up on the villagers. Shizune was able to drop in from time to time to check up on Sakura, but this was likely due to the fact that she had to take back medical reports to Tsunade about the state of the hospital. In fact, Naruto was actually surprised that Sakura was not spending her time with Sasuke, who spent most of his days in the training ground by himself honing his skills more and more. Needless to say, Naruto was a bit happy at this, but still he did not find any reason why Sakura had not once talked to Sasuke properly since Naruto had brought him back to the village. Then just as Naruto was about to brush his thoughts about Sakura away and delve further into his sleep, he heard the knocking on his door. A bit surprised as to who was knocking on his door at this time of the day, he thought that it was one of his friends who had come to hang out with him. A bit irritated since he did not like it when his sleep was cut short, he slowly dragged himself to his door and opened it, his eyes still half closed. However, the person he met standing on the door surprised him so much that his sleepiness all drifted away. "Sakura-chan, what are you doing here?" Naruto asked the pink-haired girl who was on his doorsteps. It wasn't such a misplaced question, since it wasn't exactly the first time that Sakura had been to his house. She had been there before to inform him that he had been summoned by Tsunade in her office. Although at this point in time, there were barely any feuds between the five great nations, plus the Akatsuki had been completely dealt with, therefore the number of missions had considerably lessened. "Naruto, Tsunade-sama sent me to call you. She says there is an emergency and we need to go to her office as soon as possible," Sakura explained to her blonde-haired teammate. This news sent a jolt down Naruto's spine. The word, emergency, immediately made him think of mission, and it had been an awfully long time since he had been out of the village. He felt like he needed the much-desired break from his monotonous lifestyle at the moment, and a small part of him told him that it would help him find a way to deal with his oncoming confession for Sakura. Honestly, he did not have any idea how he would go about confessing his love for her. Of course, he could just go to her and tell her, "Sakura-chan, I have always loved you. Please go out with me." However, something told him that doing this out of the blue would just earn him a punch from Sakura, along with her extremely shocked face afterwards. Pervy Sage had once that with a woman you had to set the atmosphere before you confessed, and you had to go about the whole process carefully lest you risk the woman running away from you forever. Still, he had no idea how to do this, so he might have as well seek some inspiration by leaving the village and getting some pointers by observing the environment around him. "Give me a minute. Let me get my jacket, then I'll be right there," he told Sakura, and immediately he went back into his room and retrieved his jacket, which was lying on his bed. Putting it over his white t-shirt, he looked at himself in the mirror carefully to make sure that he looked presentable enough to walk with Sakura in the streets of Konoha. The last thing he wanted to do to her was to embarrass her in the midst of all the villagers who would watch them as they were walking by, so he made sure that his hair was in order and he had brushed his teeth. He had taken a shower that morning, so he did not need another one at that time of the day. Meanwhile, Haruno Sakura took the time to observe Naruto's living room while she stood at his doorstep waiting for him. So this time he made sure to clean up properly, she told herself. The last time that she had been to Naruto's place, it was awfully untidy, that Sakura had even seen a cockroach go under his bed. This time, however, there were few of his clothes that lay on the ground untouched, and the floor looked as if it had been cleaned hastily. Sakura had been given a break that day from her daily hospital duties, owing to the fact that the number of discharged patients had been increasing slowly. By this time, the number of patients still in the hospital was more than 20, but luckily enough by the end of the week they would all have been released and gone home. When she had been summoned by Tsunade in her office and told to get Naruto, she happily obliged, since she had missed seeing her friend for so long. Still, one thing nagged her. When Sai had revealed to her how deeply Naruto loved her, she had been shocked. Shocked since she never thought his feelings for her were that strong. she had always assumed that he sported a silly crush for her owing to the number of times he asked her out on dates and she declined each time. She had thought that he would eventually grow out of the crush, so hearing that he had fallen deeply in love with her made her heart shatter into small pieces. She had treated him so poorly when they were kids, but still he protected her and cherished her. Then he made her a promise that he would return Sasuke back to her, even putting her own feelings for Sasuke above his feelings for her. This made her shed tears of agony. She cried and even told herself that Naruto was foolish enough to love someone like her. Sai had told her that Naruto had not confessed to her yet since he had failed to keep his promise to her, so he felt unworthy of her love. Sasuke had returned to the village already, so Sakura wondered why he had not confessed to her yet. Since the event at the bridge with Yamato, Sakura found herself questioning her feelings for Naruto. What exactly did she feel for him? Sure, the two of them were friends, but was that all there was to it? She felt that there was something more, something which she could only discover once he had confessed to her. Sakura-chan, what's wrong? Naruto had finished preparing himself and was standing in front of her at the door. She was caught by surprise, and immediately she shook her head to signify that there was nothing amiss. Naruto took her word for it, and closing the door behind him, the two descended the steps leading to Naruto's house, their destination being the Hokage Tower. The blonde-haired young man and his pink-haired teammate had finally reached the last level of the stairs leading from his apartment. The streets of Konoha were not as full as they normally were, something which puzzled Naruto. He was sure that they would be full of people going up and about their activities, but looking closer he noticed that he could actually count the number of people who were walking on the streets and looked at his teammate in a way that asked for an answer to this strange situation. Sakura noticed her teammate's stare, so she shook her head and then asked him, "What?" She had a feeling that she knew what Naruto was going to ask, but still it was better not to jump into conclusions too soon. "Anyo, Sakura-chan, why are the streets deserted today? I thought they would be full of people since the war is over and everything is back to normal. Don't tell me everyone is still asleep or something. Wait, that means they are lazier than me. That's a good thing then, right?" Exclamation mark. Right, he implored from his teammate, his eyes beaming in what was pride. Sakura was amused by this antic, since she did not expect Naruto to use this as a chance to praise himself by comparing himself to other people. She smiled a little then said, "You know that doesn't really change anything, Naruto. You're worse than them since you've always been a heavy sleeper, and they just started right now," she explained a little, then saw Naruto pout a little in disappointment. She chuckled a little, finding further amusement in Naruto's little stunt, but decided to cheer him up a little. "But at least you're dropping that habit. Your room looked a lot tidier than it normally does when I dropped by to call you. I hope it stays that way." Naruto's pout slowly turned upwards into a large grin, the grin Sakura had been so used to seeing in their years as a team. She would never tell anyone, of course, but that grin always cheered her up whenever she was having a bad day. It made her look forward to seeing Naruto a lot, and whenever he said anything while having that grin on, it made her believe that anything he wanted to do was possible. Heck, that was the same grin that was on his face when he promised that he would bring Sasuke back to her all those years ago, and even though it took a painfully long amount of time, sweat, blood and tears, he had finally managed to bring Sasuke back to Konoha. Back to his home. Sakura smiled a little, then a small part of her wondered. What if he confessed to her while plastering that grin on her face? Would she accept him, or would she just push him away? Her thoughts were cut short when she saw a hand in front of her face. "Sakura-chan, are you okay? You look a bit dazed," Naruto asked her, while waving his hand in front of her. A worried look was on his face, and Sakura realized that she had been so caught up in her thoughts that she had momentarily stopped walking. Embarrassed a little, she said, "Oh yeah, sorry, I think the heat just got to me a bit." It wasn't entirely false, since the sun was at its peak in the sky, and Sakura knew from her time as a medic that staying in the sun too much could give someone heat stroke. She decided to use it as a leeway, knowing that Naruto had no way of finding out that she had laid. Naruto's worried expression, however, did not leave his face. Really? Sakura-chan, if you're too hot you can just remove your top. Naruto stopped momentarily, realizing a moment too late what he had just said. Sakura threw him a death glare, and Naruto felt a cold sweat break on his body. He remembered that time in the war when he had promised that he would never cross Sakura again after seeing her strength once she had released her strength of 100 seal. He slowly walked backwards, and immediately Sakura hit the ground where he had previously stood, leaving a small crater in her wake. Naruto, how dare you tell me to remove my top? If you want to see me naked I swear to Kami that is the last thing you will ever say and see. Sakura shouted at him while chasing him. Naruto, who did not desire to be on the end of Sakura's wrath, ran as quickly as he could, while apologizing profusely. I'm sorry Sakura-chan, I didn't mean to. I was just trying to make you feel better. Liar. You're just a pervert and I swear to Kami if I catch you you'll wish you never left the house with me. Sakura added on, but somewhere within her she felt herself laughing. It had been long, too long actually, since she had felt herself being so free with her teammate, and having a good laugh. She had been cooped up too long in the hospital for her own good, realizing that in there the only things she ever heard were the screams and moans of patients, plus instructions and reports from her workmates. But here, with Naruto, she could be herself, and have a good laugh without having a care in the world of who saw her. Kakashi, Sai and Yamato had all seen how she had acted around Naruto, and although they were taken aback at first, they all remarked that Naruto always managed to bring out her true self. Suddenly, she saw Naruto stopping, and stopped herself too. The anger she had before was replaced by a feeling of surprise. Slowly, Naruto turned to her, before smiling and saying to her, actually, you know I wouldn't mind dying if you were the one who did it, Sakura-chan. Sakura had a perplexed look on her face, so she relaxed her fist, before looking at the man who was in front of her. Oh, and why is that? She inquired, expecting to land a punch on the man for any ridiculous answer he would give out. Because I know Sakura-chan will pump my heart and bring me back to life. Naruto joyfully exclaimed, grinning widely at Sakura-chan. Sakura was taken aback completely by this answer, and the look she gave Naruto was one of amazement. What's with that look, Sakura-chan? This time it was Naruto the one to ask her. Sakura's memories went back to the time of the war, when Naruto had lost Kurama to Uchiha Madara. Sakura remembered the distress she felt when Gaara brought back Naruto's dying body to her in Tsunade. She was so shocked that Naruto had ended up like that, since she had put so much faith in him. She had always thought that Naruto would never end up in a condition like that, and immediately began her attempts to revive him. Her chakra ran out midway through the process, and she resorted to manually pumping his heart, while giving him CPR. Eventually, it was the combined efforts of Minato and Obito which managed to bring back Naruto, and Sakura thanked Obito, even though she knew he was an enemy. She did not expect Naruto to have found out about that and bring it up in a situation like this, so she slowly opened her mouth to say what she thought was best in that situation. Why you? How did you know? Sakura stuttered, and she felt her cheeks turning red due to embarrassment. The more she thought about that situation, the more and more it seemed to her from another perspective that she had in a way, kissed Naruto. Even if technically it was her job as a medic and his teammate, she had not noticed it, but back then she had tasted Naruto's lips. It was an odd thing, since in a way he had taken her first kiss, albeit unknowingly. Naruto looked at her pensively then said, oh, that. After the war was over I went to Sunagaku to have a talk with Gaara and exchange a cup of sake with him. Sakura immediately interjected, sake. Naruto, you took sake. Exclamation mark. But, you just turned 18. Her worry, of course, was not exactly misplaced. She just did not want to see Naruto turn into a drunk like her master, Tsunade. It was just a small request that Gaara had made when I met him after I was revived. He said we should exchange a cup of sake once I became Hokage, but seems like he couldn't wait. The first thing he did when I got there was welcome me with open arms and offer me a cup of sake. Then while we were just talking and catching up on recent stuff, he told me about how you were so determined to save me that you pumped my heart with your bare hands and even gave me CPR, Naruto calmly explained to Sakura. The surprise that was on Sakura's face lessened a little, but Naruto continued, I wish I was conscious back then I could have tasted Sakura-chan's lips. She tasted mine but I can't even remember what hers tasted like. A blush immediately broke out on Sakura's face, and she turned beet red in embarrassment. That's a good thing then. Besides all I could taste was ramen, so it isn't really something that new, she tried to defend herself. Naruto smirked at her. See, you do remember. Well now I can confidently claim that I've taken Sakura-chan's first kiss. Lucky, Naruto remarked while his whole face beamed with happiness. Sakura, meanwhile, noticed the red on her cheeks had not faded, and she hoped that Naruto would not notice it while he remained in his blissful state. Don't be too happy, you idiot. That was only once. Either way, let's get going. We'll be late in getting to Tsunade-sama's office. Sakura said, hoping that this would get Naruto's attention away from the fact that in a way, he had taken Sakura's first kiss. Naruto replied, oh, I almost forgot about that. But first before we do that, we need to take care of Sakura-chan's heatstroke. Sakura chuckled, since he did not expect that he was still hung up on that fact. She was about to object and say that she was quite okay and he didn't need to make a mountain of a molehill out of her heatstroke, but Naruto immediately stopped her by telling her, wait just a moment, Sakura-chan. I'll be right back. Make sure not to move from here, okay? She nodded, and immediately Naruto dashed away like a man possessed. Sakura moved to the fence and leaned her back against it, deciding that it would give her a chance to relax. She had used more energy than she had expected chasing after Naruto earlier. Wondering where Naruto had gone to, Sakura looked at the sky, deciding that it would help her clear her mind about what had happened. What Naruto had revealed to her earlier about knowing that she had put all her best efforts into healing him had struck her like a bombshell. Naruto joyfully exclaiming that he had stolen her first kiss was indeed flattering, and she decided not to take it seriously, but somewhere in her heart, she wanted to believe it had really happened. After all, she did remember tasting his lips and they did indeed taste like ramen, but contrary to what she had thought about ramen before, she noticed that she did not mind the taste at all. I wouldn't mind tasting it again, she thought to herself. True to his word, Naruto showed up again almost 5 minutes later, which Sakura thanked the heavens for since she would not have time to dwell on what she had just thought to herself mere moments before he had showed up. In his hand, she noticed that he was carrying a small white paper, and she wondered what was inside the bag, before he reached out inside the bag and pulled out a white stick that had been wrapped up at the end with a soft paper. The paper was slightly moist, and Sakura immediately realized that it was ice cream. Her heart was filled with warmth, since she honestly had not expected Naruto to get her ice cream simply because she had lied to him about having heatstroke earlier. Sorry it took a while. But I got you this. I hope it makes you feel better, Sakura-chan, Naruto said, handing her the ice cream. Sakura sighed a little. There it was, that genuine and honest care for her well-being. Sakura used to dismiss it as Naruto being a generally good-natured person, but ever since Sai revealed to her the extents to which Naruto goes to make her happy, she could simply not ignore it anymore. The man had genuinely fallen in love with her. Sakura felt her heart being weighed down by sadness, a sadness that stemmed from the fact that she had never noticed, yet Sai was only a member for a few months, and he had picked up on Naruto's feelings for Sakura. She extended her arm and reached out for the ice cream, while saying, "Thank you, Naruto." Then it happened. She felt the tips of her fingers brush against Naruto's fingers, and suddenly something jolted throughout her entire body. Naruto felt something similar jolt throughout his body, and immediately he got embarrassed and withdrew his hand. Of course he had held Sakura's hand before, but this time things felt a bit different. It was in such a casual setting, and he realized that it had been a long time since him and Sakura had actually managed to spend time together like this without anything or anyone interfering. They were the only two people in the world at the moment. Sakura quickly drew the ice cream stick away from Naruto, and before she removed its wrapping she heard him saying, "Make sure you finish that soon, Sakura-chan. Or else the sun will make it melt and it will stain your top. And then now you'll really be forced to remove your top since I doubt you'll want to walk in Konoha while there is a stain on your clothes." Sakura smiled a little, realizing that the anger she felt at his former statement regarding her removing her top due to the overbearing heat had all but disappeared. "I know, thanks again," she remarked, and the two set out for the Hokage Tower once again. As they were walking, Sakura realized that she had been taken completely off topic, so she decided to resume her earlier explanation to Naruto. "As I was saying earlier, Naruto," she made sure to put extra emphasis on his name so that he would not think of interrupting her this time, and after hearing the gulp that came from him, she sighed satisfactorily before continuing, "The reason why the streets are deserted is because most people are spending time with their families after the war. You realize most of the shinobi who were in the war had left their families back here in the village, so since most of them came back bruised and battered, their families were so happy that they had returned, so they are making sure that they spend as much time as possible with their families," she explained while taking a bite out of her ice cream. It was really cold, but Sakura realized that she needed the cool down after spending most of her time in the hospital and away from the outside world for quite some time now. Naruto nodded, and then he realized that he had not asked Sakura something important, something that he had not asked her in a while now. "By the way, Sakura-chan, how are things in the hospital going? I realize that I haven't been seeing much of you, so I guess it must be really tough, huh?" Naruto inquired, while looking at Sakura as she ate away at her ice cream. He realized just how beautiful she looked as she gracefully took in each and every bite. The ice cream left wet trails on her lips, and as she licked them away slowly, Naruto noticed his growing curiosity to find out what her lips tasted like. Maybe they tasted like that strawberry-flavored ice cream she was currently helping herself to. Naruto shook his head to clear his mind of the thoughts he was currently having, realizing that it wasn't a good idea to think that at such a time. It was a bit taxing at first, due to the large influx of patients that were being admitted due to the war's aftermath, but at least it's getting better and better of late. More and more patients are being discharged, and luckily enough less than 5 have actually passed away in the midst of surgery, Sakura began explaining, but soon her face changed into a rather gloomy expression. Naruto did not need to be told what it meant. He realized that for a doctor, failure was a terrible thing to experience whilst at work, and this involved the loss of a patient. More so, losing a patient after putting all of one's efforts into saving the said patient's life, and it still wouldn't be enough. He moved his hand and slowly patted the small of Sakura's back, in an effort to cheer her up. Sakura looked up into his sky-blue eyes, and weakly smiled back at him, before resuming her earlier explanation. "Sorry about that, Naruto, I got a bit carried away. The number of patients has decreased, and now I think there are less than 20 who are still admitted in the hospital. Hopefully by the end of the week, all of them will have been discharged, and then finally I can get a good rest after working non-stop all those hours," Sakura concluded. Naruto withdrew his hand from her back, and then gave her thumbs up before saying, Go Sakura-chan. Make sure that you finish soon so that I can go on a date with you." Sakura sighed a little before saying, "Naruto, You do realize that you might probably be away on your mission by the time that I'm finished at the hospital, so how exactly will you manage to ask me out on a date? Naruto gasped in shock, and said, "Oh no, you're right. Well then I guess that I better hurry up with my mission so that when I get back I can give you all the time in the world." He stopped talking momentarily, and realized the magnitude of the words he had said. Sure, he would give Sakura-chan all the time in the world if he had the chance, but there was still one issue that he was not sure was still standing in his way. Him. Naruto's thoughts immediately switched to a dark-haired Uchiha, and he realized that Sakura might prefer to spend time with Uchiha Sasuke rather than with him. He was a bit disheartened by this fact, but decided that he could give himself hope by the fact that Sakura did not seem interested in Sasuke at the moment. This could be due to the fact that she had been caught up in her work, but still, she was spending time with him, right here and right now. That had to mean something, right? Following this train of thoughts, Naruto asked Sakura, "Sakura-chan, where's Sasuke right now?" The question itself wasn't wrong, since Naruto had genuinely not seen much of his best friend once he had come back to Konoha. He had only caught glimpses of him once or twice in the streets of Konoha, and even though Naruto had tried calling out to him, he did not respond. This wasn't exactly foreign since Sasuke did not exactly tend to be all chummy with his friends, but the look that Naruto had seen on his face both times had indicated that he had been very busy. Naruto assumed that he was probably heading out on missions or something akin to that, but something in his gut told him that it was something more. "Oh, you didn't hear. Well, that serves you right since you spend all your time cooped up in your house sleeping and eating ramen," Sakura reprimanded him. Tsunade-sama put Sasuke-kun in charge of the Anbu. Naruto's eyes almost popped out of their sockets at this revelation. It was his turn to now shout at Sakura, and she had to hold her hands in front of her to calm him down. After he had stopped shouting, Sakura noticed that he still looked visibly shocked, so she decided to explain, "Well, you know that the Uchiha were in charge of the police force before their demise, right?" Naruto nodded, since Tobi had explained this to him when he had told him, Kakashi and Yamato at the Land of Iron, while he told them the truth about Uchiha Itachi. Tsunade-sama decided that punishing Sasuke-kun for his crimes would not be nearly enough, so she decided to place him in the Anbu, and made him a unit leader. She said that even if Sasuke was an international criminal, he was still an outstanding prodigy, so it would be better if his skills were put in service of the village. Makes sense now. Naruto took in every word that Sakura said slowly, and realized that it all made perfect sense now. The police force were no longer, and it would be a bit difficult reviving them with only one Uchiha remaining, so it fits better to put him in an Anbu unit, since they were akin to a police force of the village. In his head an image of Sasuke wearing an Anbu outfit popped up and he laughed a little of how ridiculous it looked. It was then that Naruto had realized just how cut off from the world he had been in all the weeks after the war, and he was so grateful that Sakura was here with him now. He desired to learn more and more about his team and friends, so he quickly added on, "What about Sai and Kakashi-sensei? How are they doing these days?" "Oh, Kakashi-sensei is sort of like Sasuke's mentor in the ANBU. Well, even though he doesn't exactly go out on missions with them, he gives Sasuke pointers once in a while, and the two of them spend their free time honing each other's skills in the training grounds." Naruto nodded, and realized that due to his sensei's lazy nature, such a job actually fit him perfectly. Sakura continued, "Sai became Root's leader, and now they've been recognized as an official body of Konoha by Tsunade-sama. They don't exactly work hand in hand with the Anbu, but still they get their fair share of espionage missions and assassination missions, so I think that Sai is doing pretty well. He was Danzo's top agent, so there wasn't really much fracas when he was appointed leader. Everyone accepted him without question. Unlike with Sasuke-kun, where there are still some people in his unit who don't want to accept him as a leader. So he has to work hard for their acknowledgement, Sakura concluded. Naruto nodded, realizing that he was actually happy that Sai had finally found his place en route. He wasn't too happy with how some of the treatment that Sasuke was getting, but he realized that it was understandable, so he decided to let it slide. Sakura finished the last portion of her ice cream, and looked at Naruto appreciatively, before letting her arm that was catching the ice cream previously fall to her side. Naruto, who was looking at her intently, did not miss that. Immediately, he felt a desire to hold her hand in his. It looked so soft, and he realized just how it would fit perfectly into his. He was certainly no stranger to holding a girl's hand before, having held Hinata's hand in the war to transfer Kurama's chakra into her. But still, something held him back. Was it because this was the girl who he had adored, and yearned for nearly all his life? Making such a bold move here would be the first step to him finally confessing his undying love for her, but was it really worth it? How would Sakura herself perceive this action? Would she let him hold her hand, and let him walk hand in hand with him? Or would she simply brush his hand away and continue walking nonchalantly to the Hokage Tower? Naruto decided that such a question was better answered if he actually made a step forward, so slowly, he raised his arm. Naruto's hand slowly made its way to Sakura's hand, which was swaying slowly on her sides. On closer look, he noticed that it was creamy, and as soft as a feather, unlike his rough hand that had been torn up time and time again from the many battles he found himself in. This was probably caused by Sakura spending most of her time in the hospital healing patients, and it had been a really long time since she had been out in the field to battle. His gaze shifted to Sakura's face, and with a bit of relief, she had not caught up on what he was trying to do. Naruto remembered with a sinking feeling in his stomach that Sakura would probably sock him in the head if she realized that he was trying to touch her hand, but a small part of him hoped that she would take the gesture positively and allow him to hold her hand, even if it was only for a short amount of time. He did not notice the small tinge of red that had appeared on Haruno Sakura's face. Naruto felt the warmth emanating from Sakura's hand, and a small smile began emerging on his face. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't turn out to be so bad after all. He felt the tips of his fingertips making contact with Sakura's palm, and was about to adjust his hand to get a better hold of hers, then. "How are you, Sakura-sama?" A voice suddenly interrupted the tranquil silence that the two teammates were currently enjoying. And with that, Sakura's right hand moved to brush a lock of her hair past her ear to get a better look at the person who had just given her the greeting. "Good morning, Azumo-san." "Katetsu-san too," Sakura greeted the two Junin. Naruto looked, with obvious dismay in his expression, at the two people who had just appeared to intrude on the moment that he was having with the girl he loved. "And you too, Uzumaki Naruto-sama. Not that it's any of my business though, but Naruto-sama, what are you doing?" Katetsu Hagane inquired of the blonde young man. And true enough, his question was necessary in the situation. Naruto's hand had lain suspended in the air near Sakura's waist, having been the position where her right hand was relaxing a few moments before, which could have made any passersby wonder what the hell he was doing. It was as clear as day that he was planning to touch Sakura's waist, and possibly, pull her closer to him as the two walked together towards the Hokage's building. Luckily enough, for him, and for Sakura too, the streets had been deserted that particular day, so the only people in the vicinity were Katetsu and Izumo. The red on his cheeks growing brighter from the faint shade that it had been moments before when his hand had brushed Sakura's, he quickly pulled his hand backwards and then put it on the back of his head, scratching it sheepishly. He then turned to the two Junin, before saying, "Oh, that was nothing really. I was trying to scratch my head since a bug had flown into my hair and it tickled a lot. Really, nothing big." Naruto explained as quickly as he could, hoping to Kami that his excuse would fly past the head of the two Junin. "Well, He wasn't called the #1 most unpredictable ninja for nothing. It was summer after all, and summer meant that there were many bugs in the air, so it was actually an argument that carried a lot of water. Kotetsu stared at him serenely for a second, before opening his mouth and saying, "Well, if you say so then." It looked like a completely different thing to me though, and it would to a lot of other people too. That's not what I was trying to do, damn it, Naruto thought in his mind, but did not voice his thoughts lest he would be considered a pervert in the eyes of the two Junin. Luckily enough, Sakura-sama here did not notice what you were doing, or you would be in a world of pain. Surprisingly enough, Naruto had not noticed Sakura's expression throughout the entire debacle, and this statement from the dark-haired man made him realize that the girl was still there. With a sweat drop on his face, he slowly turned his head to face the girl, ready to face her wrath due to the misunderstanding that he had just caused with her. His eyes came to rest on Sakura's visage, and he noticed, with a huge sigh of relief, that she still maintained the same stern expression that her face had adorned when she had said hi to the two Junin. He would not know that the thought of him holding her by the waist excited her a little in her heart. At least not yet anyway. The truth was, Sakura had known for a while that Naruto was trying to hold her hand, having noticed the odd silence that had embraced the air after the incident with the ice cream. However, she did not want to alert him too much that she was quite well aware of his intentions, so she decided to play along with his wishes, since a part of her had been conflicted with her feelings for the blonde young man for a while now. At first she had wondered what his lips would taste like after the incident with the CPR in the war, and now there was this. She wondered what his hands felt like. Of course, she had held Naruto's hand before, such as with the incident on the Heaven and Earth Bridge, but at that time they had been so focused on catching up to Sai and locating Orochimaru's hideout that she really hadn't paid attention too much to what she had done. Now that she remembered it, she really had made physical contact with Naruto plenty of times, but the feeling had all but vanished in her body. Now here Naruto was again, trying to hold her hand, and she found herself willing to let him do it. He deserved it, after all he had been through for her, so she would let him do it just this once. However, once Naruto's hand had come so closely dangerous to hers, she felt a small blush creeping up on her cheeks, something that she had never experienced before with Naruto. About to allow him to continue in his quest to touch her, she saw that they had already arrived outside the door to the Hokage building, and standing just outside it were the two guards, Hagane Kotetsu and Izumo Kamizuki. Of course, Sakura had been no stranger to the two Junin, who were recently promoted from Chunin rank. She remembered distinctly how the two of them, alongside Ino, Shikamaru, Choji and Aoba Yamashiro, and a group of other Junin and Chunin, had arrived in the village a long time ago with the devastating news of Asuma Sarutobi's death. Before that, the two of them had spent time on the gate as guards, so that was one of the few times they actually got hands-on experience in the field. However, all that changed after the Fourth Shinobi World War. Due to the role of the two in keeping the village safe from any external threats while most of the shinobi were away fighting Kabuto and Tobi, once Tsunade had returned to the village and resumed her normal duties, she felt it prudent to promote them to Junin and to also station them as guards outside the Hokage building. Well, the first time they had heard this news, they were a bit exasperated as to why they had been given a promotion all of a sudden, but hey, it did beat lazing around in front of the gate all day while nothing of much interest occurred on the outskirts of Konoha. So after a few moments worth of thinking, the two of them gladly accepted their new posts and moved to the Hokage building. It went without saying that obviously on this side of Konoha, security was more of a grave issue since they were protecting the leader of the village. While it was obvious that she could protect herself just fine even without the help of Junin or even the Anbu, they still had to keep their guard up at all times, lest they were demoted and restored to their original positions. So once the two of them had got wind of a pair of footsteps slowly approaching the Hokage's tower, Their gaze shifted to the two newcomers who had just showed up, with their senses heightened for anything. After all, the most ideal time to attack or infiltrate a village would be when it was in the process of a relative peace, proven all those years ago when Uchiha Itachi and his partner, Hoshigaki Kisame, had infiltrated the village in an attempt to capture Naruto. Thank Kami that Sakura still had the mind to observe her environment even while her insides were baffled as to what Naruto was trying to do to her. She noticed that they were no longer alone, so she quickly withdrew her hand in a fake pretense of drawing her hair back. Being seen by the Hokage's personal guards holding hands with her longtime friend and teammate, who she had been through thick and thin, was definitely cause for Tsunade to tease her immensely once the news had reached her ears. Tsunade aside, her assistant Shizune probably wouldn't let her have a moment of peace while giving Sakura advice about relationships and boys. Not really all that surprising considering the fact that Shizune spent a lot of her time warning Tsunade about how her drinking habits would give her liver problems one day. And all because of a simple handhold. Sakura swore under her breath, realizing just how obnoxious adults could be over trifling matters that didn't even concern them. She then realized that her parents would let her have it while asking how far she had gone with the young Uzumaki, and if there were plans for something more. She then realized how lucky she was that her parents had not learned of the feelings that she held for Sasuke since they would probably edge her on, telling her that she would be the luckiest girl marrying into Konoha's strongest clan. Feelings that she was not sure about anymore, partly because of all that Sasuke had put her through, and of all that Naruto had done for her, ever since they were kids. Sakura saw Naruto's dejected face as he stared down at Izumo and Kotetsu, and realized that he probably had gotten the wrong idea about what she had just done. She felt a sinking feeling in her stomach, and made a mental note to make it up to him later. It was the least she could do after all, since he had just bought her ice cream after seeing her for the first time in a really long time apart. There would probably be many more chances after this that the two would be together alone, especially considering the fact that Sasuke had been separated from the duo after being posted in the Anbu, alongside Kakashi. Sai himself had been made the head of Root, and Yamato had resumed his former duties as one of Tsunade's Anbu members, meaning the two of them were the only active remaining members of Team 7. It wasn't really a bad thing, Sakura thought, since even Tsunade-sama had told her that the two had already become of age, so they really didn't need a Junin sensei anymore. They could handle themselves just fine at that point, and Sakura thought, maybe, just maybe, even our relationship could bud into something more. Right, Naruto. Naruto and Sakura, after their greetings to the two, walked forward and stepped onto the first stair of the Hokage building. It was then that Naruto realized just how long it had been since he had been to see Tsunade in her office, and he felt a sudden surge of affection welling up inside him for the blonde, beautiful lady. It was only because of her that things were like they currently were with Sasuke, and he would be forever grateful to her for that. Feeling a little bad that he hadn't been to see her as often as he used to when he used to barge in her office asking for a mission, the pace in his steps increased and he suddenly found himself in the corridor of the main buildings. Naruto, wait up, Sakura called out to him, calling him out of his current train of thoughts. She appeared from the other side of the corridor, and Naruto realized just how he had been caught up in his thoughts about meeting with Tsunade again that he had almost left Sakura behind. Feeling a bit guilty, he stopped to let her catch up with him. Once the pink head had reached him, she allowed herself a minute to catch her breath, before looking at Naruto, who was looking at her with genuine worry in his eyes. Sorry about that, Sakura-chan. I was just caught up in my thoughts of seeing Grandma Tsunade again. It's been an awfully long amount of time, after all, Naruto apologized to Sakura. She steadied herself up, and put her arm on her hip, before smiling at him and saying, "Oh I get you're excited and all, but remember not all of us can keep up with you. Just keep calm. You do realize she's not really going anywhere even if we walk there at a snail's pace, right?" Honestly, Sometimes she just didn't know what she was going to do with the blonde idiot. Hee, you're right about that. Okay then, you lead the way, Sakura-chan. Baka. Let's just walk there at the same pace. Makes it more fun after all, right? Naruto then let Sakura appear at his side, and the two began walking to the front office, which was now visible to them. Nay, Sakura-chan, back then, why did those guys call you Sakura-sama, and me Uzumaki Naruto-sama? I didn't expect to be called that by people from my own village. I don't think I've really done anything that praiseworthy to be called Sama, don't you think? Naruto asked his teammate. Honestly, he had not expected to be addressed by such an honorific by people who were of an even higher rank than him. While yes, he was indeed stronger than them, still, that did not bridge the gap of respect that had been between the different levels of shinobi in the village. Sakura looked at Naruto curiously to see whether he had been pulling her leg, or simply trying to act humble, but the look in his eyes simply said it all. He was indeed clueless of the situation that was in the village and even in the 5 great ninja nations for a while now. Honestly, he was too honest for his own good, and one could easily read his expressions and emotions simply by looking at his eyes. Well, that was one of his good traits, Sakura realized, so she decided to break the big news to him. Oh, you haven't heard about it? Well, no wonder. Sasuke-kun, Kakashi-sensei and I were already told about it, so I guess it's time for you to learn about it too. Learn about what? Sakura-chan. A curious Naruto kept his eyes locked on her, cerulean eyes meeting emerald eyes. Well, the thing is, after the war, after everyone was freed from the infinite Tsukuyomi, Kakashi-sensei informed Tsunade-sama about everything that had transpired once everyone had been caught in the infinite Tsukuyomi. Well, that included the fight with Madara, then what happened with Kagaya, and how Team 7 had teamed up to defeat the world's biggest foe, and Sasuke-kun and Naruto fighting, and how they both worked together to dispel the infinite Tsukuyomi. Quote, I see, and, Naruto pressed on, honestly bewildered as to why people would start calling him by Sama after such an event. He was simply doing his duty as a shinobi, so there was no need for such a drastic change in events. Sakura shook her head, before saying, Oh Naruto, don't you see where I'm heading to? Obviously Tsunade-sama could not keep quiet about such an important issue since it involved the entire ninja world, so she called for an emergency 5-cage summit, and informed the rest of the cage about what we had just accomplished. Of course, they were all a bit furious at first that they had to be saved by Konoha and a bunch of brats, but after a consensus they all agreed that we would be considered heroes from that day onward, meaning all the ninja villages were supposed to treat us with the utmost respect. Just like how Kakashi-sensei's dad was referred to as the White Fang, plus your dad was referred to as the Yellow Flash, even before he became the 4th Hokage. You see. Naruto listened to the entire story with a keen expression on his face, honestly having not expected things to have been elevated to that status. Sure, he had saved the world, alongside Sakura, Sasuke and Kakashi-sensei, but really it was out of a selfless act for the future, not for the mere sake of getting flashy names added to them. But Sakura-chan, he began to protest and Sakura shook her head again. She must have expected this already, since Naruto was already too selfless for his own good to accept such things from other people. Well, he was that kind of an idiot after all, Sakura thought, so before he said anything else, she placed a finger on his lips. His breath felt hot on her finger, and she felt a bit embarrassed as to the bold action she had just taken, but hey, she had locked lips with him before, albeit unintentionally but in a literal sense, yes, right. Obviously this was just the tip of the iceberg to her, so she didn't have to feel this flustered. Yet she still did. Why was that though? Again, Naruto was making her heart flutter wildly and she had no idea what exactly about him was causing this sudden rush of emotions from within her, but she used her willpower to fight against it. Come on Naruto, the decision has been made, and I don't think even you can overturn a collective decision made by the five Kage. Sakura silenced her teammate. Oh yeah, watch me. Naruto shouted. His voice carried unwavering doubt and a great sense of confidence, the same voice with which he had promised to bring back Sasuke, and here he was again in the village, safe and sound. For a moment, Sakura wanted to believe that he could really do it, but there was more fun in challenging him than just making him go straight for it. She released her finger from his lips, and Naruto almost regretted savoring the sweet scent that it had carried. However, Sakura spoke up as soon as he had finished his statement. You know what, Naruto? She took a closer step to him. Staring at him, her emerald eyes staring into his cerulean blue eyes, with the same fire that she had looked at him once she had laid down her resolve to fight alongside him and Sasuke in the war, as she was also a member of Team 7 and trained by one of the legendary Sannin just like her two male teammates. For a second, Naruto thought about planting a small kiss on her lips, but he withheld the desire, since it was neither the time nor place for such an intimate act. Those eyes that carried so much in them and were one of the reasons that Naruto had fallen so hard for her in the first place. I'd like to see you try. She finished her earlier statement. Naruto's eyebrows slowly rose in surprise, and he could not help but feel impressed at the challenge that Sakura had just bequeathed on him. So he pumped his fist in the air and said, "Believe me, I will." Quote. The two realized that they had reached the door to Tsunade's office, and after a knock from Sakura, they heard the indignant sound of Tsunade from within, asking the two ninja to enter the room. Before Sakura had reached the door knob to pull it open, however, she immediately felt a gust of wind on her entire body, before realizing that he had already wrenched the door open and was well on his way to Tsunade's desk. Sakura just stood dumbfounded at the door, slightly smiling to herself, amused by the amount of enthusiasm Naruto was displaying just to see the Hokage again. Before realizing that she was completely wrong, owing to the grim expression on Naruto's face. Remembering what they had just discussed outside the office, she realized that Naruto was probably intent on changing that whole hero status that he and his team had been anointed, so she quickly charged in after her blonde teammate. Naruto, wait, she said, stretching out her hand ready to hold him before he shouted at Tsunade or did something irrational. She had only challenged him on a whim, seriously not expecting that he would not take it at all. Even if he was a village hero and the son of the fourth Hokage, there were things that he could and could not do. But it was too late. Naruto had already slammed both of his hands onto Tsunade's desk. The elderly woman looked up from her position on the other side, having set her eyes keenly on a parchment and being barely unfazed by Naruto's sudden appearance. Ba-chan, we need to talk. Tsunade slowly put down the scroll she had been studying so intently for the past few minutes. Yes, we really need to. You guys are late. This is about wait what? A surprised Naruto asked, having caught wind of Tsunade's last statement. Behind him, a cold sweat broke out on Sakura's body. She was well aware of Tsunade's temper, having been on the receiving end of it several times during her years of training with the older woman. One thing that one was always supposed to remember was never to be late to an appointment with the female Hokage. You guys are late by over half an hour. Naruto immediately realized that the older woman was pissed off by the way she said this statement slowly, so he sheepishly put his hand behind his head and said, "Hee and we got lost on the road of life." Sakura face palmed behind him. Seriously, using one of Kakashi's most common excuses in such a situation was like adding oil to the fire. She swung her head in shame and prepared herself to hear the sound of crashing and contact with the wall of the office. Really, Naruto, using that cliché on me? Hey, at least I tried. Unless you want me to say that we took a detour and I had to buy Sakura-chan ice cream because of the damn heat. Sakura's blush immediately crept up onto her cheeks, faster than it had even during the day. There it was, the cat was out of the bag. For a second, All the anger that was building up within Tsunade after what seemed like forever waiting for Naruto and Sakura to show up vanished. She turned to look at Sakura, who had still been keeping her distance from Naruto once the two had entered the room. Sakura, is this true? Sakura meekly nodded, and then raised her head to meet the brown eyes of her master. Tsunade was smiling a little, having found amusement in what Naruto had just revealed to her. The blonde woman had known for a long time now the feelings which Naruto held for his pink-haired teammate. It was clearly evident that day in the hospital ages ago when Tsunade had first set foot into Konoha after the death of her lover, Dan Kato. Of course she had just come to be inaugurated as the fifth Hokage, but due to Naruto's constant bickering and persistence, she had first set foot for the Konoha hospital, where Sasuke lay after his devastating defeat at the hands of his brother, Uchiha Itachi. Of course, Tsunade was not known as the world's greatest medical ninja for nothing. She made quick work of Sasuke's injuries, and within seconds the young, raven-haired man was seated wide awake in the hospital bed. Sakura immediately rushed to his side, tears in her eyes, as she wrapped her arms around the young man and began sobbing into his shoulder out of relief. Tears of joy slid down her cheeks and Naruto watched the whole scene unfold before him like it was straight out of his worst nightmares. Sasuke, you, Naruto started, his eyes closed and a forced smile making its way onto his cheeks. No, he couldn't allow them to see he was hurting, allow her to see he was hurting, since Sasuke had just made a full recovery and Sakura was overjoyed to see him up and kicking again. She was happy, and that was all that mattered. So Naruto slowly turned his back to the residents of the room, and dragged his feet until he had opened the door and exited the room. Unknown to him, Tsunade was watching him the whole time, and once he had his back turned to them and his face downwards in sorrow and grief, she felt a soft smile on her cheeks, and then said, so he can be pretty sensitive sometimes. Since that day, it had been blatantly obvious to her that Uzumaki Naruto was in love with Haruno Sakura, a relationship that mirrored that between her and her late teammate, Jiraiya. Jiraiya loved Tsunade, even whilst she was still in love with Dan. His feelings hadn't changed, up to even the last time she spent time with him on that bench before he left to face his untimely death in a megacure at the hands of the Akatsuki leader, Pain. Now here stood Naruto, and still, after all that time he retained the same feelings for his teammate that he had always held in his heart. Hearing that he had bought Sakura ice cream made Tsunade realize that his heart still belonged to her after all that time, and she couldn't help but be filled with nothing with respect for the man. It wasn't easy loving someone who you knew loved someone else, but what made it absolutely wonderful was if you were still willing to be there for them, no matter how painful it was. Naruto was living proof of that, and Tsunade felt herself rooting for the young man somewhere in her heart. Tsunade looked at the two teammates before her, and then lowered her head in thought, before proceeding to face them again. However, Naruto began speaking again, taking the moment she had fallen quiet as an opening to speak up again. Ba-chan, before anything else, there's something I want to discuss with you. I know Naruto, and my answer to whatever you're going to ask is no. Naruto's mouth opened wide in shock, and he stared at Tsunade as if she had just contracted the chakra virus. I haven't even said anything yet. The blonde ninja protested. That's the thing, Naruto. You ought to be careful of how loudly you talk while within this building. These walls have ears, you know. Tsunade smirked at the young man, and Sakura giggled behind her. So that was what it was. Naruto had been a bit too loud in talking to Sakura while they were just outside Tsunade's office, and unluckily for him, Tsunade had managed to catch wind of everything that he had just told Sakura. Of course, that included the bit about revoking the decision of the five Kage to refer to him, Sakura, Sasuke and Kakashi as heroes. Sakura made a mental note to tease Naruto about this later on while the two were alone. The Pinkett then turned to her master, and spoke up for the first time since she had entered the vicinity of that room. Tsunade-sama, what are the details of the mission that we are supposed to set out on? Tsunade thanked Kami that there was one more sane person in that room apart from her, since she was dead sure that Naruto would have pressed the matter that he had till she got a headache. Ah, yes, your mission. She picked up the scroll that she had been holding before being interrupted, and then skimmed through it one last time before turning to Naruto, placing her hands on her head. Okay. This is going to be a bit tricky. I don't know where to start. Sakura looked in surprise at her master, and then replied, try and explain it to us in more detail then. Okay. But this is a matter that Naruto is more familiar with since he has had previous contact with the client, well, in unique circumstances, if I do say so myself. It was Naruto's turn to look at Tsunade in surprise. Unique. What do you mean by unique, Ba-chan? Naruto, do you remember the incident that you had a while back with the kunoichi named Shizuka from Nadeshiko village? Tsunade asked a perplexed Naruto. Naruto suddenly froze up, and his memories slowly shifted to the silhouette of a young girl, who had fair skin and was of average height. Shizuka herself was a fairly beautiful woman, with eyes as green as Sakura-chan, and with her waist-length black hair tied up in Heim-style cut tied up in a high ponytail with short bangs and chin-length strands framing up her face. Honestly, Naruto had to admit that she was an attractive woman. While she wasn't attacking him and seeking his hand in marriage though, he added on in his thoughts. He had not told anyone in the village about his encounter with the kunoichi, or the knowledge that he had come to learn about Nadeshiko village, the female-only village where men were forbidden to enter. Sakura, however, was not as green with general knowledge as much as Naruto. She remembered being taught something like that in the academy, and she then wondered where Naruto had been during such a crucial lesson. Probably sleeping or wreaking havoc in the village alongside Shikamaru, Kiba and Choji. Naruto then asked Tsunade, why you, but how did you know about that? Oh, Yamato told me about it once we returned to the village and he gave me the report of all that had occurred since you left to head for the land of lightning. That included your sudden marriage proposal and fight with Shizuka from Nadeshiko village, with her master Takiwa as audience. Marriage proposal? A shocked Sakura asked. Honestly, she had not expected something as big as that to reach her ears within the village. She felt her insides squirming with hotness, and turned her head with Naruto, a vein slowly popping up in her forehead. She had at least expected Naruto to tell him something of this magnitude, so she felt left out that she had not heard about this particular adventure from him. That, plus something else that she had not expected to feel at such a moment. Jealousy. Wait, Sakura-chan, I can explain. Naruto raised his hands in defense, his face now turned to the Pinkett who was standing behind him in the room. You'll tell her about it en route to the village, Naruto. You're already late and there's no need to delay any longer within the village. Your particular mission is to help resolve a certain issue that occurred there recently, and since they were unwilling to reveal the full details due to fear of compromise on the safety of the village, they informed us that we would receive the details of the mission once we had already gone there. Got it. Sakura nodded curtly, and decided to ask Naruto about his experience with the girl named Shizuka from Nadeshiko once they had departed. However, she was concerned about one thing, so she decided to ask Tsunade. Tsunade-sama, not to be rude or anything, but why assign the two of us particularly on this mission? I mean there are other skilled shinobi in the village, so wouldn't it be more efficient to send them instead? Tsunade then replied, well, I thought the same thing too at first, but when I weighed all the possible options it seemed more efficient to send the two of you. I mean, Naruto has already made contact with their strongest kunoichi, and it seemed that the two of them left off at a good note, so there'll be considerably less hostility once you enter the village. And then, there's you Sakura. You're his teammate and the one who's known him the longest, and the two of you must a good combination in battle. Plus, there's the fact that you are a girl, and a kunoichi just like most of their inhabitants, so adding to the fact that you'll manage to enter the village without many issues. You see, sending too many people might make the residents of the village in a state of unease, so I decided to send only a two-man team, trusting that you'll be able to handle the situation well with your current abilities. Analyzing all that her master had told her, Sakura nodded her head firmly, then said, "Understood, Tsunade-sama. We'll leave immediately." Tsunade then folded up the scroll that she had read their mission specifics from neatly, and handed it to Sakura, before saying, "Here is a map to the village of Nadeshiko. It's located near the land of water, so it will be a considerably shorter trip than the one which you had made to Sunagakur. I'm leaving this map in your care, Sakura, since us both know that a certain blonde idiot might have trouble reading this map." Sakura chuckled a little, then placed the map into her pouch, before turning to Naruto, and seeing the expression on his face, ushered him on. "Come on, Naruto. You don't want to be late for your reunion with your bride." Naruto was snapped out of his thoughts, where he was just wondering what had just happened to Nadeshiko that they even had to ask for help from a hidden village of all places. He did not hear the slightly bitter tone that had been in his Sakura's voice when she said the word, bride. Sure, let's get going, Sakura-chan. Quote. And with that, Naruto and Sakura immediately exited Tsunade's office, their destination Nadeshiko village. Naruto groaned in exasperation, while he had positioned himself on one of the walls that was just at the gate that led into the village. Once they had left the Hokage's office, Naruto had suggested that they make haste for the gate and depart immediately for their mission. He felt a sudden rush of excitement and eagerness overcomes his entire body, as he had not been on a mission like this since forever. Well, it was certainly a good change of pace from the lazed-out life that he had been living every day till now, and he was ready to start out as soon as possible. However, his teammate, Sakura, seemed to have other things on her mind. She had told Naruto to head to the gate first, while she went and dealt with a meager issue before being fully ready to set off for the mission. Naruto, slightly surprised by this, asked her what she intended to do and if he would come along with her to assist her so that she wouldn't take too long. She turned down his offer of assistance. Naruto was about to protest, but Sakura, having expected this, as she knew how stubborn Naruto was sometimes when it came to her, immediately waved him goodbye and departed from his presence. 10 minutes had already passed, and Naruto felt impatience gnawing away at his insides. He certainly did not like being kept waiting in situations like this, and he started tapping his fingers on his elbow. Naruto closed his eyes and began wondering what was taking Sakura so long, and then, the image of a raven-haired Uchiha appeared in his mind. Naruto's eyes suddenly jolted wide open, and then he came to a painful conclusion. Sakura had probably gone to tell Sasuke goodbye, having decided not to tell Naruto since she knew that Naruto could not, for the life of him, tell Sasuke where he was going. Well, the two of them were best friends, that went without saying, but there were some things that were better kept to themselves rather than revealing them to each other. Besides, Naruto would probably want to brag about his mission to Sasuke once he had returned to the village, therefore telling him goodbye would definitely kill the surprise. Naruto smiled sadly, as it finally hit him. Sakura had definitely gone to see Sasuke off, and with how the Uchiha had managed to redeem himself after Naruto beat some sense into him during their battle at the final valley, there would be a chance that he would probably hug the kunoichi goodbye. Team 7 was Sasuke's family after all, well, his only living family, after the last members of his clan died off in the war, in Uchiha Obito and Uchiha Madara. It wouldn't be too far-fetched for him to hug Sakura goodbye after all that had been said and done, and for one maddening second, Naruto had an image of the two in each other's arms, saying things like, "Take care," and, "See you later." Well, to say the truth, he had expected this ever since the Uchiha had returned to the village. Sakura still held feelings for the man, evident in the way she confessed in front of Naruto and Kakashi before the final battle between Naruto and Sasuke, and how she shed tears for him, pleading for him to come back. Naruto had known, all along, that his own feelings for Sakura would always cause him to suffer because of her feelings for Sasuke, but yet he had still chosen to love her anyway. He had known that if he had chosen to walk along this path, he would suffer immeasurably, but somehow, he still held hope, and he knew that the pain was definitely worth it for the girl he loved. With this thought in mind, he allowed himself to smile a little over the sadness that had overcome his expression, and decided to wait for Sakura patiently. Naruto. He did not have to wait very long this time. Her voice broke the train of thoughts that was running through his mind, and he looked up to see her running towards him from the opposite side of the road. He smiled nonchalantly at her, and then waved at her to hurry up and join him so that they could leave. As Sakura approached him and he was getting a clear and clearer view of her, he noticed that there was something on her back. It was a bag, a medium-sized bag, for that matter, and from the material that was used to make it, he realized that it was a camping bag. Odd, hadn't she been to see Sasuke off? So what was the deal with the bag? He got confused for a moment, but waited for her to reach him so that she could clear his confusion. That took you a shorter time than expected. Sakura suddenly stopped in her forward motion. Wait, what? Naruto raised his back from the wall he was currently resting on so that he could get a better look at his teammate, who seemed as confused as he did over what he had just said. Weren't you seeing Sasuke off? Sakura was taken aback by what Naruto had just told her. Honestly, just how much did he think that her whole world revolved around the Uchiha? She balled her hand into a fist, and felt the sudden urge to knock the blonde shinobi over his head. While it was true that she might still have held some lingering affections for their teammate, it wasn't as much as she had in the past. In the past, while they were still genin, she may have actually done what Naruto had just suggested she had been doing, but she wasn't the same old girl before. But this time, things were different. Entirely different. Naruto had not realized that yet, and for some reason, Sakura felt a bit hurt by his sentence. Why would I forget it? If you really must know what I was doing, then I was making sure to get some supplies since I knew that you would be too hyped up for the mission that you would forget the most important thing. Naruto felt his mind become more and more jumbled up by what Sakura had just said, so he asked again, with a bewildered expression on his visage. What did I forget? Sakura sighed a little, and then placed her hand over her head. Her other hand, which was still balled up into a fist, suddenly released itself. Well, she had expected this to happen, at any rate, since her blonde-haired teammate was an idiot. Well, sometimes he pulled through, but most times he was just that, a dunce that was not able to read the mood or atmosphere. She couldn't be angry with him after that. After a few seconds of silence where Naruto just stared at Sakura curiously, she lowered her hand from her face then said. Well, you seem to have been too dense to figure it out, so I'll tell you. We are going on a mission to Nadeshiko, and we don't know how long we'll take on the mission, right? So I thought it would be best if I carried personal effects, like tissue and toothpaste plus a few bottles of water in case we get parched along the way. And a few clothes too, in case the ones I'm in become too filthy and I need to change them. I also carried medical supplies in case one of us gets injured along the way and they need emergency medical treatment. That's it, that's what I was doing all the time while you were waiting for me here. Naruto nodded his head in understanding, finally getting a grasp of the situation and why Sakura had decided to take her sweet time in getting there. For some reason, he felt immensely relieved that she had not decided to spend her last moments in the village seeing off Sasuke and telling him that she would be back soon, but of course he would not tell her that. It would be too selfish of him. Still, he felt a bit guilty about having such feelings of envy towards their raven-haired teammate. He was not supposed to feel this way, but sometimes he could not help it, and at those times he loathed himself for not being more elated that Sakura was happy loving Sasuke. He grinned at Sakura, and flashed her one of his trademark thumbs up, as a sign that he had finally gotten his head around the matter, before something else popped up in his head. Actually, it would have been better if he would have not mentioned it at all, but well, Naruto was really an idiot sometimes. Sakura-chan, do you really need all that stuff? I mean, it's not like we'll be out of the village for long. I don't think you should carry all those personal effects. Sakura felt a vein pop in her forehead, and this time she could not restrain herself from smacking Naruto over the head. Naruto winced in pain, and rubbed the spot over his head where Sakura had just landed her fist, before finally staring into her eyes again. She was furious, and Naruto realized that he may have landed into hot soup already, even before the mission itself had already started. Well, he was already used to this so many times before, but this time Sakura herself seemed extremely angry. Naruto realized that he may have crossed the line a bit too far this time. For Kami's sake, Naruto, I'm a girl. I need to take care of my personal hygiene more than you, you know. I swear sometimes you come off as the biggest baka in the world. Naruto smiled meekly, as he awaited another punch to land from the pink-haired girl. Well, he had not expected the answer to be that simple. True enough, he had not exactly taken such a long time on missions before with his female teammate before, so he really did not pay attention to the amount of luggage that she carried on each and every mission. This time, however, was different. They were heading into an unfamiliar territory, so it was uncertain how long that they would take heading there and even heading back to Konoha. Sakura had certainly taken no chances in getting herself ready for a mission of such magnitude. Well, Naruto felt a bit mortified that he had not thought this far ahead, but well, Sakura was always smarter than him, so he couldn't really help it. Sakura, on the other hand, felt a bit better after socking Naruto in the head. Well, she knew that the man was a bit dense in matters regarding females, but she felt a bit special, since he tended to act this way around her and not the other kunoichi in Konoha. True enough, there were plenty of other beautiful girls in Konoha, amongst them her best friend Ino, who was stunningly beautiful since she had fair skin and her blonde hair was definitely a +1 in anyone's eyes. However, Naruto seemed to treat the rest of them indifferently, as he held no particular opinion of them. He viewed them all as part of the big family that he had of Konoha, and each of them was an important part of his life that he could not afford to lose. However, with Sakura, things were entirely different. He could act as goofy and as free as he wanted, and no matter how many times Sakura reprimanded him, he was not angry at her in any way. He was still the same idiot that he was when they were first placed in the same team, and that hadn't changed a little bit over the years. Even though the death of his master Jiraiya had caused him to start looking at things in a much more level-headed manner, he was still the same old Naruto when he was with his pink-haired teammate. Somehow, this matter made Sakura feel at ease. Out of all the things that had changed in her life as she grew up, Naruto was the one constant factor in her life that never changed. He was her blonde idiot. If it makes you feel any better, I promise I won't get myself injured during the mission. Besides, I heal really fast these days now that I've gotten Kurama's chakra completely under my control, so I definitely won't be a bother to you. Sakura sighed again. Leave it to Naruto to try and patch up a situation after creating a certain sense of awkwardness between two people. Well, at least he was trying to make her feel better after offending her in some sense, so she could at least take on his efforts. They weren't exactly good enough though. I guess you're right about that. But I don't think it would hurt to be careful. Besides, you may need more delicate care such as stomach upsets from eating something bad in the forest, and I don't think Kurama knows how to heal an aching stomach. Sakura remarked, but in some part of her she felt a bit sad. She knew that Naruto made a valid point, since after mastering the chakra of the Nine Tails completely at Turtle Island, his healing speed had skyrocketed. Normal medical ninjutsu seemed like such a fluke to him at the moment. She felt a bit sad that she wouldn't be able to take care of Naruto as much as she had in the past whenever he had gotten himself injured, no matter the level of the injury. Still, she wanted to be there to take care of him in any way possible, meaning she would not give up so easily. Naruto pouted at her playfully at her statement, his hands lowered in a show of disappointment. Sakura knew he was joking however, so she let him continue. Sakura-chan, you know I'm more careful than that. I won't just put anything I see in my mouth. Oh no, I'm not buying that Naruto. When you were helping me, Ino and Choji collect medicinal herbs for the war, you decided to check out which ones were the correct ones by tasting them. I mean, who does that? Naruto's memories shifted to the time when they were sailing to Hidden Cloud, and remembered when they had made a stop at an island that was rich in medicinal herbs, and there he had run into Sakura, Choji and Ino, who were on a mission to collect herbs assigned to them by Tsunade. Naruto had decided to help them out, since his team had to let Guy-sensei recover from his bout of seasickness, but when Ino had specifically told him what exactly to look for, he discarded her information and decided to use his own, unorthodox method to look for herbs. Which involved, yes, tasting each and every plant on the island and finding out which one had the same taste as the plant that Ino had shown him earlier. This later cost him the use of his chakra as they were attacked by a group of rogue ninja that had the same objective as them in acquiring medicinal herbs, but for sale. Well, that was, Naruto started, but then Sakura placed a finger to her lips, which was an indication that any further protests were not allowed. She smiled, and then said, I think that's that. I'll be carrying the medical kit. Besides, what happens if I get injured? That won't happen. What makes you so sure? A curious Sakura asked, although she had a feeling that she might have figured out the answer before it escaped his lips. Because I'll definitely protect you, Sakura-chan. Naruto was beaming at her, his smile as bright as the sun that was currently overhead, while one of his hands was at the back of his head. Sakura could not bear to look at his extremely vibrant face at the moment, so she shifted her gaze to a lamp post that was next to them, and silently muttered, Baka. Well, shall we go then? Naruto removed his hand from the back of his head, and then raised his fist into the air, before shouting, yeah. With that, the two teammates exited the village and began walking towards Nadeshiko village. As they were still on the path leading out of the village, Naruto raised his head and let out a moan of discomfort. Sakura did not fail to notice this, as she was standing next to him, so she asked him. What is it this time? You forgot something. Naruto looked at Sakura, then pouted a little and said, well, yeah. I didn't want to raise this earlier when we were leaving the village since it could have set us back by some time, but when you said that you carried stuff, I realized that I didn't carry any personal effects for this mission, so it might set us back a little. Sorry about that, Sakura-chan. Sakura looked at Naruto for a few minutes, taking in the disappointment that was registered on his expression at the moment, and then let out a chuckle. Truly, if she left him to his own devices, she was not sure just how far Naruto would be able to make it. Naruto saw her chuckling, and then thought that she was laughing at his mistake, so he exclaimed at her in dismay. Sakura-chan, it's not funny. We may have to spend time in shops shopping for my stuff and then we'll be set back in completing the mission. Sakura's chuckles died down, and then she said to the blonde, no, it's not that, Naruto. I mean, you shouldn't really have any problems even if you didn't carry extra clothes, right? You're always in that orange jacket and pants, so I don't see any need to change into anything more. Hey, I do have other clothes like this, you know. It's just that orange is my favorite color, so all of them happening to be the same color as this one. I do change my clothes, Sakura-chan. Sakura blinked in surprise, taking in the slight bit of information that Naruto had just revealed to her. In all her years of knowing him, she had come to learn a few things about him, but she had never actually known what his favorite color was. She had always thought that he had chosen to clad these orange jumpsuits because he had a terrible sense of fashion, not because it was his favorite color. Not that she minded the clothes though, they seemed to fit him so perfectly with that overly bright personality of his. Orange was the color of the sun as it set, and he was like the sun to her, plus most of the residents in Konoha. I see. So orange is your favorite color then. She smiled a little at this, and then turned to Naruto, preparing to tell him something that she had not told him ever since meeting him at the gate. Well, it had to do with why she had also decided to take her time preparing for this mission. She had foreseen this predicament that Naruto would fall into, therefore she had decided to act accordingly. She wasn't his teammate all those years for nothing. Well, Naruto, the truth is, I didn't just go back to get my personal effects. As I was heading to my home, I decided to pass by your place, and also get some of your clothes and stuff. You what? Naruto was flabbergasted, and his mouth was opened wide in surprise. Sakura held up her hands in defense, because Naruto looked as if he was about to eat her up right now. Unbeknownst to her, the blonde who was beside her was beside himself with joy. Never before had he expected Sakura to actually watch out for him to this extent. She had gone to limitless extents for him before, each time more than the previous time, but this blew all of them out of the water. Naruto beamed at her, and she found herself smiling back at the ear-to-ear smile that Naruto had just shot at her. Lowering her hands, she replied to Naruto's rather loud question, "Well, like I said, I passed by your house and picked a few of your items that I thought would come in handy during the mission. Well, actually I found the door was unlocked so I just let myself in. Then I went straight to your room, it was actually still in the same clean state you left it in this morning, and took a few of your personal effects, placed them in my bag and locked the door behind me." Next thing Sakura knew, she was being enveloped by an extremely sturdy pair of arms, and a patch of blonde hair blocked her view. She shrieked a little because of the sudden gesture, and then she felt her feet leaving the ground. She felt herself spinning in midair, and then realized that Naruto had just held her in a tight hug and was currently twirling her around in bliss, while laughing heartily. "Thank you so much, Sakura-chan. You're a lifesaver. I don't know what I could do without you," Naruto exclaimed in joy, while spinning the pink-haired girl around him. Sakura held onto his arms for life, because she did not want him to suddenly let go of her in a frenzy or slip from his grip and fall to the ground below them. Her nostrils got the waft of Naruto's scent, due to their close proximity, and she found the scent actually pleasing. Naruto's eyes were closed and his mouth was open wide in laughter, and all of a sudden Sakura became aware of how dangerously close their faces were. Well, Naruto had definitely grown taller than her in his training session with Jiraiya, meaning he had dwarfed the pink-haired Kunoichi, so the fact that he had raised her like this meant that the two were on the same height. Sakura found herself staring at his face, taking in the blonde eyebrows, and the whiskers that adorned his cheeks. They were surprisingly cute. Suddenly, she felt her cheeks growing scarlet, and frantically shot her gaze away from him. The sudden jerk of her face made Naruto become aware of what he had just done. His eyes slowly opened to meet the face of his teammate, and he was met with the sight of her fair cheeks. There was a slight tinge of red on them, and Naruto wondered what had caused that. However, what really startled him was the fact that he realized that he had the girl in his arms, and could feel her body pressing up against his. He gasped a little, and then released the pink-haired girl almost immediately. Sakura yelped a little, before her bottom collided harshly with the ground below her. Naruto frantically rose his hands and began waving embarrassedly, as he had just ashamed himself twice in front of the apple of his eye. "Ow, I'm sorry, Sakura-chan." Naruto made a step forward to help her get off the ground, but then his instinct stopped him, telling him that if he took a step closer to Sakura he would be in for another world of pain. She rubbed her bottom, then got up from the ground and dusted her behind, which had just gotten dirtied by her sudden collision with the ground beneath her. Once she had steadied herself, she looked at Naruto, who noticed that the tinge of red that had been on her cheeks previously was not there anymore. Naruto then realized just what had transpired between the two of them. For the first time in his life, he had hugged the girl of his dreams, something that he thought would never happen to him. Sure enough, the two had shared a hug before, but back then, it was Sakura who had hugged Naruto instead. He had just returned to the village after talking with Nagato of the Akatsuki, and convincing him till he revived all the villagers of Konoha. Sakura, alongside the other Konoha shinobi, had eagerly awaited his return, and once he had appeared, on the back of their master, Hatake Kakashi, she walked towards him silently, while feeling anger and relief well up inside her. She was angry that Naruto had taken such a risk upon him fighting the leader of the Akatsuki, and relieved that he had managed to come out of the whole matter unscathed. So she knocked him over across his head, habits that she had for a long time now around him but she found difficult to drop, and once he had fallen to her arms, she slowly raised him and enveloped him in a warm hug. At that moment, Naruto was visibly shocked, as the expression on his face looked like that of a man possessed, and he looked totally out of place while he was in Sakura's arms. However, his insides were screaming with joy, and he felt as if he was on cloud nine at that moment. He was not sure whether he was supposed to hug her back, so he let his arms fall freely to his sides, while enjoying the embrace of his Sakura-chan. Now, here back to the present, he had just hugged Sakura. He had also gone as far as spinning her in the air, something he was sure that happened between couples, as his mom had told him about how Minato had hugged her in ecstasy and raised her in the air once she had broken to him the news about her pregnancy. Well, Naruto had just done the same thing to Sakura, while it was for an entirely different, and somewhat silly reason, and she had not protested yet. In fact, she had let him hold her for a few moments, and once he had let go, she had not made any attempt at showing her disconcert with the matter. Did that mean something? Naruto thought to himself, while looking at his teammate. Sakura, on the other hand, who had been pleasantly flustered by Naruto's actions, cleared her throat, preparing not to show him what his hug had done to her. She looked at Naruto, who seemed to be out of it at the moment, and then told him, in a higher voice than normal. Well, make sure that you keep your house safely locked next time. I mean, you never know who could make their way in there and make away with some of your stuff. Naruto, who was brought back to earth by Sakura's statement, shook his hand and then said, "Oh, that's no big deal, Sakura-chan. When I was a kid and the village still hated me, they used to break into my house and destroy some of my stuff. Even when Gramps III gave me a lock to my room, they still managed to vandalize the lock while I wasn't around and still destroy my house. So I decided to leave the matter like that. I've not really had a lock on my door since then." Sakura was surprised by this, not expecting to hear something like this from Naruto. She always assumed that he left his house unlocked due to his sheer laziness and carelessness, therefore she had never thought that he had a reason for doing that. This was the second thing that she had learned about Naruto today, the first being his favorite color, and the second one of the reasons for one of his age-old habits. Curiosity got the better of her, and she was not sure if she should be asking this, lest she opened up some old wounds, but she still had to know. She felt that if she did not ask, she would miss up the chance to learn about one of the most important parts of Naruto's childhood. Well, what made them finally stop? Naruto looked at Sakura, and noticed the concerned look that was on her face. This wasn't good. He had made her worry, something that he didn't like doing to her. He always wanted her to live her life happily without concern for his troubles, since seeing her happy made his days loads better. However, it would not do any good to not tell her about this, so he decided to proceed with the story. Well, I didn't have any valuables in my place, so there weren't any missing stuff or something like that. Most of my stuff was left in tatters though. There was a time that I found the whole fridge had been thrown onto the floor, and its contents emptied, so I had to clean up the whole kitchen. It took me the whole night just cleaning up, and the next morning I had a fever since I was using cold water the whole night. I think they got bored of it or something, since once I turned into a genin the attacks stopped all of a sudden. Or maybe they thought now I could be able to defend myself since I had finally become a ninja. At this, Naruto pointed to the Hittite that was on his head, and smiled widely at Sakura. She felt all the concern that was in her dissipates at this, and felt her facial features relax. Leave it to Naruto to make a grave situation like that look like a walk in the park. Ever since he was a kid, he never really let negative things get to him, always choosing to look at the bright side of anything that seemed to be dark or gloomy. Maybe that was one of the reasons that Sakura had come to like his company so much. Even at times when she felt discouraged and felt like giving up altogether, he was always the one who encouraged her to get back on her feet and gave her the will to live. They had reached a section of the road where there was a forest of trees in front of them, and Sakura became aware of how far they had traveled. Well, Nadeshiko village was just near the land of water, meaning they had to walk a shorter distance than they had when they were escorting Tazuna to his home in their very first mission as genin. Sakura took out her map, and Naruto came closer to get a better look as to where they were currently. He did not understand anything of what was written on the map though, so he scratched his head in confusion. Sakura noticed this, and realized that she had to explain the whole matter to him. Naruto, you know, if you really are aiming to become Hokage, you really should learn how to read maps better. You're going to be having to deal with diplomatic relations with other countries, and that will require traveling to countries of the 5 great nations. During the time that she had spent training with Tsunade, Sakura remembered that Naruto's dream was to become the Hokage, so out of curiosity, she decided to pay close attention to the work that Tsunade was engaged in daily before she created time to train Sakura. She realized just how much work a Hokage had to deal with daily, from handling paperwork to approving of requests from the feudal lord, and suddenly felt pity for Naruto since she knew that he wasn't smart enough to handle all that work. However, this did not stop her from supporting his dream, but she made it a point to inform him of any key points he would need to know in his quest to become the Hokage of the village. Naruto smiled at her meekly, then said, "Hee, I'll cross that bridge when I get there." "You're already on that bridge, idiot. How long do we have till we get to Shizuka's village?" Naruto suddenly interjected, changing the subject to what was important at the moment. Somehow, Sakura did not like the way he referred to it as Shizuka's village, but she decided to carry on with the explanation. Well, according to this map, Nadeshiko village, Sakura made sure to put special emphasis on the name for a reason which Naruto did not know, before continuing, lies just beyond this forest of trees. Actually, it may be in this forest of trees. The village itself is positioned upon the lightly forested top of 3 massive and steep hills standing in a line, with 2 bridges spanning the gorges between them. The hills are situated within a lush forested valley in a mountainous region. So at some point in this forest we should come across a valley, and that's where the village lies. Sakura finished her explanation, and looking upwards at Naruto, whose eyes were shut and he was nodding, took it as a sign that he had understood everything that she had just explained to him. Well, at least he was not a total idiot. Sakura rolled the map and returned it to her pouch that rested at her hip. The two of them then ascended into the lush of trees that was just ahead of them, their pace increasing from what they were using before. The sun was already in the western part of the sky, meaning evening was already setting in. If Sakura's calculations were correct, they would be able to make it just as the sun was setting and darkness was falling across the entire land. As they were jumping from tree to tree, Naruto realized that he had missed the odd sensation that came with leaping through forested areas as they were doing missions as Team 7. He smiled a little, and savored each step he took from branch to branch as he propelled himself forward, and next to him, Sakura was keeping up with him perfectly. He looked at her, and saw that she had her eyes fixated in front of them, so he decided to say something to lighten the mood that was currently in the air above the two of them. "Wow, it's been a long time since the two of us were on a mission like this together, right, Sakura-chan?" That may have been one of the cheesiest ways to start up a conversation in order to create a sense of relaxedness. Sakura looked at Naruto, who had his focus constantly shifting between her and his front, meaning she didn't have to worry about him bumping into any trees by accident. Well, yeah, it has been, but you do realize that you aren't the only person I can go on missions with, right? Sakura-chan. Naruto started, but he knew that the girl next to him had just told him the truth, and he could not deny what she had just said. Still, there was a nostalgic familiarity that he felt going on missions with her, and to be honest, he did not like the idea of her going out on missions with other people. Other people in this case meaning Uchiha Sasuke. Naruto realized that he was starting to act up on his feelings again, so he decided to push the matter to the back of his head, and refocus on what Sakura was telling him. At any rate, she wasn't his girlfriend, well, officially anyway, since he had told his dad that she was his girl in the war, meaning he didn't have a right to dictate whoever she went on missions with. Wait, does that mean you've been on missions with Sasuke? There it was again. Sakura noticed that Naruto had kept on bringing her relationship with Sasuke to light every time he heard that she was doing something by herself, and was ready to smack the living daylights out of him. Well, she realized that he still thought that she still held a torch for Sasuke after all that had been said and done with him and their old team, owing to how she fawned over him in the past, so Naruto could not help it. Still, she was not sure how she would reveal to Naruto that her feelings for Sasuke had weighted down a lot since he returned to the village. Was he even supposed to know? Excuse me, Naruto, but no. Come on, you know better than anybody by now just how much I've gotten stronger. I think I can handle a mission on my own without you or Sasuke there to watch over me. Even Kakashi-sensei, Sakura explained, matter-of-factly to her blonde teammate. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise, and somehow he could not help feeling a surge of pride well up in him from the pink-haired girl's statement. Well, she had a point. Naruto had seen just how stronger she had gotten for himself in the war firsthand. She was no longer the same frail 12-year-old genin that Naruto and Sasuke had to watch out for each moment they encountered a new enemy. She had bloomed so beautifully, and Naruto had been there to see it all, firsthand. You've gotten so much stronger, you know. Naruto thought to himself, while smiling, but then something that Sakura had said earlier resurfaced and captured his attention. Wait, but I thought you said I'm not the only one you can go on missions with. Yes, I did. So you've been doing solo missions all this time. While you were lazing around doing Kami knows what, and as per Tsunade-sama's orders, yes, I was. But I thought you meant that you were teaming up with others and… No, I said that so that you wouldn't get too cocky and think you're the only one who can team up with me. Naruto laughed a little. Well, I do make the best partner for you after all. Sai would spend the whole mission making fun of your looks, Kakashi-sensei would spend an entire mission with you reading his perverted book, and Sasuke would be Sasuke. He concluded with a sweat drop, as he could not imagine Sasuke managing to hold a proper conversation while with anyone in the middle of a mission. Sakura could not hold back a laugh at the last person that Naruto had mentioned and also found herself laughing heartily. Well, Naruto was right after all. It seemed like he was the best partner for her, after all. Partner. The word rung again inside her head, then she remembered something Tsunade had said while in the office. Marriage proposal. This translated to bride, which translated to lifelong partner. Sakura then realized that she had forgotten to ask about the specifics regarding the kunoichi called Shizuka, and mentally slapped her for it. Leave it to Naruto to catch her in his pace and make her forget to ask the most important detail that had been lingering in her mind ever since the two left Tsunade's office. It was the best chance to ask now, since once they set foot into the village, there probably wouldn't be any other chance to ask Naruto regarding Shizuka. Naruto. I've been wondering for a while now, who is Shizuka? Naruto gulped a little, and almost lost his footing on the branch that he had currently hopped on. Well, lucky enough he did not fall, but still, he did not expect Sakura to land such a bombshell on him at this point. He had actually forgotten to explain the entire situation to her as he had been told by Tsunade whilst they were heading to Nadeshiko, so he berated himself for it. It was not nice keeping Sakura-chan in the dark regarding certain issues. However, this certain issue was one that was kind of really embarrassing to remember, since he had divulged to the said Kunoichi something really important. Important in the sense that it involved his feelings for Sakura, something which he had made known to a few people, except the pink head herself. Naruto's memories swam back to a time when he had poised himself on the ground, talking to Shizuka in front of him, after he had defeated her but had refused to take her hand in marriage. I have a girl I love named Sakura-chan. Well, actually, it's one-sided on my part. Sakura-chan is totally in love with a guy named Sasuke. She tries her hardest, doing her best to win him over. When she's at it, her smile is the cutest thing. There's no explaining it. Before I knew it, I was in love with her. I would never force Sakura-chan to love me. I'd be no different from that guy right now if I did. So I made up my mind. In the same way that Sakura-chan tries to win Sasuke over, I'll try my best to win Sakura-chan over. The words replayed themselves in Naruto's mind, and it was his turn to get flustered over what he had said back then. Well, the truth was, he had told Shizuka about his feelings for Sakura in an attempt to make her see why her decision had been wrong, but never again had he expected to be sent back to the place where the one person who knew full well the depth of the love he felt for Sakura was. It was kind of embarrassing, the more he thought about it. Sakura noticed the blush that had appeared on Naruto's cheeks, and immediately, she thought that it had been caused by her utterance of the name, Shizuka. Somewhere in her heart, she felt a bit sad. Sad that she had no idea who this person was, yet she had spent nearly all her free time in Konoha with Naruto. She felt as if Naruto had not told her about something really important that he had gone through, but then again, she wasn't exactly Naruto's significant other or anything. Still, she had a right to know, right? Pushing back these thoughts that held weights of sadness, she looked at Naruto, who looked as if he was finally ready to answer her. Well, Sakura-chan, she's a girl who I was supposed to marry, since Ero Sennin had defeated her master. Well, not actually defeat, the match between the two of them had ended as a draw, so they decided to pass it on to their disciples. And the two disciples were me and Shizuka. The two of us did have our fight, and I defeated her. However, the marriage did not go through, since I managed to make her see reason. Sakura became confused. Wait, what? How come you didn't end up marrying her? I mean, you did defeat her, after all. Weren't you supposed to marry her if you were able to defeat her? That would make you the head of the Nadeshiko village, right? Somehow, Sakura's voice did not sound like it normally did. It sounded as if it was heavy, and bore a weight that Naruto did not fail to notice. However, he decided to press on, since he had already started anyway. He was going to reveal the entire truth to Sakura. Well, you're right about me being the head of the village if I did marry her, but I don't have an interest in becoming the head of a village I hardly know anything about. The only village I've ever been interested in ruling over is Konoha, and I want to protect each and everyone in there. So I wasn't really drawn in by the idea. Besides, I couldn't marry her even if I wanted to. There's someone else. Sakura felt her eyebrows rise a little at this. Someone else who what? Someone else who I love. And I still haven't won them over completely. So I couldn't marry Shizuka while knowing that my heart lay with someone else. It would be too cruel to her and me too. Sakura felt her heartbeat quicken a little at this. She felt relieved. Well, she was now up to date with what exactly Shizuka and Nadeshiko had to do with her teammate, but a part of her felt relieved that he had admitted to not holding any romantic interest in Shizuka. Why? She could not understand it herself, but maybe, just maybe, some part of her hoped that she was the girl that Naruto still loved. Even after all this time, she was aware of what he felt for her, but maybe he felt differently right now. She could not be sure, and that, more than anything, compelled her to ask him the next question. She was not sure whether she was being selfish asking him, but she wanted to know. She felt that she could not be at peace if she did not ask him this right now. Who is it? Naruto blinked at her in confusion. Who's what? Who is the girl you are trying to win over? It sounded more like a plea to Naruto more than anything, and he was not sure whether he was doing the right thing by deciding to tell Sakura the truth. Just as his mouth opened, however, a voice suddenly broke the tranquility that the two teammates were currently enjoying. Don't move. Nadeshiko Village. Chapter 5. Nadeshiko Village. Naruto's right leg, which had just landed on a branch of the tree that signified the end of the forest they had been in and meant that the entrance to the village of Nadeshiko would come into full view soon, slipped as soon as he heard those words telling him not to move. He tumbled backwards, and immediately realized that he was about to fall onto the ground below where the voices had come from, when he felt his body being grasped by a slender but firm pair of arms. He let his feet rest upon the branch that was behind him, as his teammate helped him steady himself and regain his balance. Thanks, Sakura-chan, Naruto said, as he looked behind his shoulder to meet the familiar blob of pink hair who had him currently in her arms. His back was against her torso, and the girl held him firmly to make sure that both of them would not fall off the tree branch they were currently on due to their amassed weight. You're welcome, Naruto. Be careful where you're going to step on next time, okay? Sakura replied behind him, and Naruto could feel her warm breath on the nape of his neck. It sent a feeling of excitement throughout his entire body, but he realized that this was not the time to be elated about something like this. Behind him, however, Sakura had realized just how close they were in proximity at the moment, and if it weren't for the interference that had appeared as she was having a heart-to-heart with her teammate in the forest, she wouldn't have minded staying with him like this for a tad longer. She knew as well as he did that this wasn't the time for this either, so she released him from her grip and Naruto felt a small part of him die a little inside. Hearing a sound of a creak next to him, he realized that Sakura had crouched on the branch of the tree so that she could get a better view of the ground before them, where the sound had come from. Naruto followed suit, and that was when he saw them. There were 3 kunoichi that were stationed at the gate that lay ahead of them, one at the far east of the gate, the other one at the center of the gate and the final one at the far west of the gate. Each of them was clad in the same uniform, which was form-fitting and was gray-colored, plus having a right shoulder guard, gray gloves, and an opening in the shirt that revealed their cleavage a little. Thus must have been the standard uniform for all the kunoichi in the village, Sakura thought, owing to the stark similarities among all of them. The kunoichi themselves had each been armed with a spear each, and at the waistlines they each had a set of kunai that went all the way round till their behinds. This was impressive, Sakura thought. The village itself was difficult to locate, and so having such a level of security at their front gate was definitely not something to scoff at. The few lucky people who had the chance of stumbling upon this village were probably all killed by these guards. With a slight feeling of shame, Sakura remembered how the gates of Konoha were watched over by Izumo and Katetsu, and those two spent most of their time asleep rather than paying attention to whoever entered the village, so she made a mental note to remind Tsunade to increase the levels of security and awareness at the front gates. They were a village in one of the 5 great nations, after all, so they had to display at least that level of seriousness to the other hidden villages in the remaining hidden villages. Still, it seemed as alert as these guards were, they had not been able to pinpoint Sakura's and Naruto's positions within the trees that lay ahead of them. They each had their spears brandished in front of them, and were looking around while proceeding with caution towards the trees. They had probably heard the sound of a branch shaking or falling leaves as Naruto and Sakura were proceeding through the trees earlier in a haste. Naruto had barely made it to the edge of the forest when he tripped and nearly fell to the ground, where he would have been in plain view of the three guards, but thanks to Sakura's timely save she had managed to stop him from causing a ruckus and creating a complicated situation with the three guards. If Naruto had just popped out of the blue in front of the gate, there was a chance that he would be lunged at immediately without a chance to explain himself, so Sakura surmised that they had to do this process as carefully as possible. Besides, she was the one that had been given the scroll containing the mission, so she was technically the one in charge of this mission to make sure that everything went over as smoothly as possible. Who goes there? Show your face, imposter. The girl in the middle finally spoke up, after looking around and finding no traces of anyone in the trees that were just ahead of her. The girl herself was fairly young, having recently become a kunoichi of the hidden village. Her hair was auburn, having been woven into a set of curls and falling loosely at her shoulders. Her eyes were a shade of sapphire blue, which surprisingly, Sakura noted, complemented her hair color quite perfectly. She was quite attractive, and Sakura had a feeling that the kunoichi in the village put emphasis on beauty as well as honing their ninja skills. How they did it, she did not know, but it was still quite an impressive feat. Let's go, Sakura-chan. Hiding like this won't give a good impression on the villager if they find out, Naruto spoke up beside her, after what seemed like an eternity of silence between the two teammates. Sakura looked at her teammate sternly, who seemed to have his gaze somewhere beyond the gates of the village, above the wall of the mountain that surrounded it. He seemed to have been trying to satiate his growing curiosity of the area, having never been here before in all his years as a shinobi, and the pink-haired girl felt a bit relieved that he had not been ogling at the girl before them. As she drew closer and closer to the area that Naruto and Sakura were lounged in, Sakura became increasingly aware that she was drop-dead gorgeous, and felt a pang of jealousy at the girl's obviously better looks. She had somewhat feared that Naruto would have been taken in by the girl's alluring beauty, expecting her teammate to have been whisked away by the girl in a blink of an eye once they approached her, but since Naruto had his mind on other things at the moment, she let her growing fears abate as she replied to him. Let's go, Sakura replied, and the two descended the tree to head to the ground just in front of the woman. As they were in midair, however, and the girl slowly looked up to face them with an alarmed expression on her face, Sakura wondered what had caused her to be so worried about Naruto being dazzled by the guard's superior looks. She told herself that it was because they were in an unknown village, and they had to be on their toes in case anything happened. However, a smaller voice inside her spoke to her and told her that this wasn't the case at all. She had no time to ponder over what she had been so worried about, however, as her and her teammate landed on the portion of earth just after the trees. There was a shriek, and the next thing Sakura knew, she had been surrounded by three spears that pointed at her in all directions. The auburn-haired girl was in the middle, while her two teammates had covered both the right and left sections next to where Naruto and Sakura had landed shortly before. They probably responded to the earlier shriek by their comrade and rushed to her aid. However, Sakura was more impressed by the speed at which they had surrounded them. They had been there in the blink of an eye, before Sakura and Naruto had even been able to react and even managed to form a coherent response to the three kunoichi. Now that the auburn-head's comrades had managed to come closer, Sakura was able to get a good look at their facial features, and she was further taken aback by how gorgeous they looked, in comparison to their counterpart. Standing to their right with her spear poised in a steady manner ahead of her and almost touching Sakura's left arm, the kunoichi there had a mass of bright green hair on her head. Her hair was wavy, barely touching her shoulders but covering every inch of her scalp perfectly, and she had a set of lime green eyes on her visage. Her gaze towards the pink-headed girl almost burnt Sakura because of how intensely she was looking at her. However, the rest of her body was completely relaxed. She seemed to be a physical embodiment of peace and tranquility, being someone that children would love to play within the lush green fields during summer. For a second, Sakura wondered just how on earth this woman was positioned to such an important task as protecting the village from any external attacks, but well, Having seen her display of skill earlier, she decided to keep her mouth shut and the words got caught up in her throat. Her comrade, on the left side where Naruto was currently standing, seemed quite the opposite compared to her comrades. Her hair was red, and her eyes were a striking set of ruby red, almost as intense as her hair color. Her spear was directly touching Naruto's chest, and she seemed as if she wanted to thrust it into him with the slightest move that he decided to make. Naruto himself had his hands in the air to show that he had no intention of harming the lady, and had come in peace, but she didn't seem keen enough to listen to whatever tale he would cook up for her. She stared at him just as intensely as the green-haired girl who covered Sakura was looking at the girl. However, she seemed to carry an aura of passion and intensity with her, owing to the tense atmosphere that the air surrounding her had taken. Naruto himself had a drop of sweat falling from his brow, and seemed to be scared for his life, having been rendered speechless by the girl's intimidating nature towards her. Sakura found it a bit amusing, because she had seen Naruto take on enemies as powerful as Uchiha Madara and Kagaya without batting an eye or retreating in fear, yet he had been scared out of his wits by a woman that would have killed him if looks could do that. It was kind of amusing, and Sakura had to do her best to stifle the chuckle that threatened to break out of her palate. However, Sakura soon found her speechless with what happened next. The red-headed girl, who was looking at Naruto as if she was staring into the very depths of his soul, loosened the intensity of her stare, and with that, her spear slowly left Naruto's chest. Her look held a certain sense of recognition, and her comrades immediately looked towards her as if she had gone mad. After placing her spear standing upright next to her, she spoke up, breaking the tense atmosphere that had been around her completely. Uzumaki Naruto, the girl said, a hint of uncertainty evident in her voice. Ahead of her, the blonde man raised an eyebrow in surprise, and, his arms still hoisted in the air, meekly nodded his head in response. For a moment, Naruto thought that she was confirming his identity so that she could be sure of the name of the man who she had been itching to kill a few moments earlier, and his hair stood on edge all over his body. This did not seem to be the case though, as immediately, she turned to her two comrades and nodded at them. The auburn-haired girl stared at her in disbelief. No way. Are you sure it's him, Akako? Sakura noticed that her eyes were beaming as she said this, and her voice was brimming with glee as she lowered her spear away from Naruto and Sakura, midsections. Beside her, the green-haired girl that was calmly keeping watch on Sakura looked towards Akako and Naruto with a hint of displeasure in her eyes, but then she followed suit with her two comrades and lowered her sword too. Yes, Sanyu-san. I'm afraid Akako is correct. Those whiskers, that blonde mat of hair on his head and those blue eyes of his, plus the Hittite on his forehead. He's from Konoha. There's no mistake, that man is Uzumaki Naruto-sama. Sakura felt a vein in her forehead twitch from the way the girl referred to Naruto as if he was her master or something like that. Still, she felt relieved that they were no longer the targets of the three girls' malice like earlier, but still, she wondered how all this was currently happening. Sanyu turned to the green-haired girl with excitement written in her eyes, and Sakura could not understand for the love of Kami why she looked so ecstatic at the moment. Was she really that happy at seeing Naruto? Wait, seriously? For real, Hanoka-chan? It's really him. This is amazing, Sanyu exclaimed in bliss. Then after breaking her gaze with Hanoka, she stared back at Akako, who was staring at Naruto as if wondering what to do with him. Immediately, she dropped her spear then rushed to the blonde-haired man, who was rubbing the back of his head sheepishly clearly looking for something to say. They knew who he was, through some unknown means, so he found himself not knowing what to say to their change in mannerisms. She halted just next to where Akako was standing, catching both the red-headed girl and Naruto in surprise, before she bowed hastily before the man. Sakura felt her eyebrows widening in surprise, wondering just what the younger girl was up to with that gesture out of nowhere. Sanyu then looked up at Naruto and said, I'm so happy to have finally been able to meet you. Everyone in the village is talking about you and how you are such a great man, so I wondered just what they meant. Now, being able to meet you like this, you look so. That's enough, Sanyu, Akako spoke sternly beside the auburn-haired woman. She was looking at the younger girl in a completely serious manner, and Sanyu felt a bit ashamed at the way she had conducted herself in the presence of the older and more experienced woman. Akako was the strongest amongst the three guardians, and Sanyu, having been the most recent one to join them, was by far the weakest. Hinoka herself was weaker than Akako, although that could be as a result of the green-haired woman failing to put as much time and effort in her training as Akako. I'm sorry, Akako-san, Sanyu apologized sincerely to the older woman, and Sakura found herself surprised by that show of respect just then. She had thought Sanyu was the type of girls that did not hold positions of authority in high regard as they were supposed to be, instead choosing to focus on things that they sound more appealing to their eyes, such as Uzumaki Naruto, who was in the midst of their presence at that moment. From Sanyu's earlier outburst of pleasure, Sakura came to understand why the girl seemed so fascinated with the blonde man, him being the hottest topic within their village. Well, it wasn't something she had found weird. Ever since the Fourth Shinobi War, with Naruto and Sasuke's fame increasing as the heroes who managed to win the war and defeat the threats that plagued the ninja world, namely Obito, Madara and eventually Kagaya, word of their bravery and amazing feats spread throughout the entire ninja world. Apparently, it seemed an underground village such as this one was not exempt from those rumors. Akako's expression softened on the younger Kunoichi, and she then spoke to her again, as long as you understand, Sanyu. Now I need you to go and inform the village leader, Shizuka-sama, that the guests she had been expecting have arrived, as quickly as possible, then return with her response. Don't keep our guests waiting. The pink-haired girl in the group caught those instructions that had been issued to the younger girl, and felt a sense of unease inside her. So whoever this Shizuka was, she had told her guards to inform them in case Naruto and Sakura came to the village gates, and this wasn't exactly your run-of-the-mill procedure when a visitor came to a ninja village. By the looks of it, Shizuka had seemed to be eagerly waiting for Naruto to arrive in the village, and wanted news of his arrival immediately reported to her. Sakura honestly found the behavior odd, but decided not to dwell on it too much. The younger girl then placed 2 fingers to the side of her head in a show of respect, before nearly shouting, "Yes, Mom." And with that, she was gone in a flicker. Naruto found himself amazed at the way she disappeared in an instant like that, and could not keep himself from gawking at the site where she had previously been standing. Akako noticed this, a bit amused, before she huffed a little and said to the blonde man, all the malice that had been directed towards him earlier gone, impressed, Uzumaki Naruto. Such is the ninjutsu that is taught here in our village. It is called the dance step, a technique almost similar to the body flicker technique that runs within the 5 great nations, but this time, the caster of the technique casts 1 step before disappearing by moving at instantaneous speed towards their destination. Just then, if you paid attention to Sanyu's foot, you would have noticed she took 1 step backwards with her left foot before disappearing. She's a novice in the technique, having recently becoming a kunoichi and being posted as a guard here, so you would still see her foot moving. For more experienced and skilled users like me, she pointed at her feet, to which Naruto followed the direction of her fingers till his eyes came to rest on her feet, and before he could adjust his eyes to take in her feet more clearly, she was gone. We can use the technique faster than the human eye can respond to, and you will barely even notice that our feet moved, she spoke up, and Naruto felt a gust of wind coming from behind him, before he found a slender hand encircled around his neck and his eyes widened in surprise. She had clearly been there for a few seconds and he had not even sensed her, yet she had been so close to him. He could feel her breath on the nape of his neck and goosebumps began breaking out in several sections of his body. This was truly a fearsome technique, in the hands of an equally fearsome woman. Sakura found herself staring in amazement at the procedure in which the technique had worked, having never seen quite a technique before. Even the Konoha library that she frequented in her free time within the village had no books speaking about such a technique, so she realized that it was probably a technique that had been passed down in the village and not allowed to leave the walls of the village. However, when she saw Akako appearing behind Naruto with her arm enclosed around him, she felt a second vein in her forehead pop that day, caused by one of these three stranger girls that had encountered them. These girls were acting way too familiarly with Naruto, and Sakura found herself disliking it for some odd reason. Too close, Sakura thought as she watched the scene before her with Akako and Naruto unfolding, so she decided to burst the Kunoichi's bubble. She'd need 100 more years of time with Naruto to be able to hold him in such close proximity, so Sakura cleared her throat loud enough for the red-haired woman to hear. Akako, catching upon the girl's gesture, released her arm from around Naruto's neck, then positioned herself in front of the blonde man again. Naruto adjusted the top of his jacket again, the slight sensation of fear he had felt earlier all but gone. That's an interesting technique, Akako-san, the blonde man said, for lack of a better word in the situation. To be honest, he was still scared of the red-haired woman, even if most of the fear he had towards her had disappeared after she had released her spear from his chest. He had addressed her as Akako-san, with as much respect as he could muster, and Uzumaki Naruto was not one to address people with respect, so this was definitely saying something. Thank you, Naruto-san, Akako replied, her tone sounding pleased at his appreciation of her technique. Jealous much? A voice spoke up next to Sakura's ear, and she nearly leapt out of skin due to the sudden surprise. Looking behind her ear, she realized that it had been Hinoka who had spoken to her, then she realized that the green-haired woman had barely said a word ever since she answered Sanyu's question earlier. She was definitely the quietest girl among the three, but seemed to be an observant person, owing to the way she had realized the displeasure in Sakura's expression earlier. Of course, Sakura wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing that she may have been right about the Kunoichi being jealous of Akako. Jealous? What are you talking about? Why would I be jealous? Sakura immediately protested to her fellow Kunoichi. She had kept her voice as low as possible since she did not want Akako to hear her, and subsequently Naruto. If he did, she would probably go and hide in a hole there and then. Keeping her voice as low as possible would also make Hinoka realize that Sakura wasn't as flustered as she had sounded, while deep inside her, she felt her heart beating a tad faster than normal. Hinoka, however, wasn't as easily fooled as that, Sakura realized, owing to the disinterested gaze she was having at the moment. Hinoka was a woman who did not like needlessly drawing out conversations, however, she always loved it whenever people were honest with themselves. And Sakura was definitely not that at the moment. Aha, you're not fooling me with that tone, Pinky. You know it's okay to be jealous when another girl goes near your boyfriend, that means you two have a healthy relationship, Hinoka stated dully, as she watched Sakura's face grow a deeper shade of red. The girl had been more flustered than with Hinoka's earlier remark, and Hinoka realized that she had hit the nail on the head with that one. Boyfriend? What, but we're not even dating? Sakura protested, a bit louder this time, and then she held her hand to her mouth. She had been a bit too loud with this sentence, and meekly, she looked behind her to look if Naruto and Akako were looking at her for her completely bizarre statement. To her relief and slight dismay, she noticed that the two of them were engaged in conversation, although it looked as if Akako was the one who was dominating the conversation, owing to Naruto's nervous smile as he listened to her. He still hadn't gotten quite used to her presence yet, Sakura thought, but he was trying as much as possible to be courteous and polite to her as he listened to her talking about what seemed to be the techniques that were passed down through her village, owing to the way she occasionally pointed at her spear as she engaged in conversation with the blonde. Yep, Naruto was that kind of an idiot, Sakura thought. Returning her gaze to the woman that was standing next to her, she saw that the woman had a slightly pleased expression on her visage. It irked Sakura a little, but still a small part of her couldn't help but believe what the woman had said earlier was true. Or rather, she wished it to be true. Oh, not dating then. It's kind of hard for anyone not to see that there is definitely something between you two. And don't give me that whole, we're just friends crap. A lot of people who say that are just plainly lying to themselves because they don't want to accept the truth for fear of being hurt. I think it's better being honest with yourself from the beginning. That way you're able to avoid the emotional roller coaster that comes with running away from your feelings, Hinoka explained matter-of-factly to Sakura, who found herself impressed with the woman's explanations. Little did she know that she and the green-haired beauty had more in common than she originally thought. Hinoka was one of the more emotionally mature women in Nadeshiko village, having taken to spending most of her time in the village in the library where she busied herself with a lot of books. There was a large volume of books to choose from, ranging from ninjutsu to more down-to-earth topics such as flowers and romance. The village of Nadeshiko prided itself in the fact that it could be able to bring up kunoichi that were as strong as they were beautiful, not choosing to sacrifice one over the other. So of course, more feminine topics such as romance had to be addressed within the village. This was an added advantage since it meant that the girls wouldn't be taken advantage of by men who claimed to love them only in name, but when push came to shove they wouldn't be there for them. Hinoka was one of the few women in the village who had excelled in both fields. Sakura opened her mouth to retort to the woman's explanation, but found herself rendered speechless by the utter brilliance of her words. They made perfect sense now that Sakura heard them, and she felt the words reverberating in her mind over and over again, as the truth sunk in her. Hinoka was right about everything, so Sakura found it increasingly difficult to deny what the mature woman was implying about her relationship with Naruto. So tell me, Sakura, what is he to you? Hinoka asked, her voice sounding dangerously calm as she uttered each word. Sakura wished that she could be able to find an answer to that question, but truth be told, she had been wondering the same thing herself for a long time now. Ever since Sasuke had returned to the village and she found she not as eager to spend time with him as she had in the past when she was younger. In fact, most times as she was working in the hospital taking care of the casualties from the war that they had all survived, she found herself growing increasingly curious about her blonde teammate and wondering what he was doing in those moments. Sasuke himself had joined the Anbu together with their master, Hitaki Kakashi, so he was probably on duty 24/7. But with Naruto, things were different. He had finally brought back Sasuke, which had been his goal for a long time now, and Tsunade was still the Hokage, meaning it would still be a long time before he would take on that seat. Even if there were some voices in the village that agreed that the fifth should probably retire soon, Naruto himself wanted Tsunade to live out the rest of her years as village leader before she retired willingly and possibly passed on the mantle to him. Sakura wondered what he was doing in the confines of his room, and sometimes when she was free in her office, she felt a desire to go see him and spend time with him. She missed him, even if he was always there for her at her beck and call. She did not know when she had started feeling this way, but in her gut it bothered her as she was questioning just what her status was with her longtime friend. Well, the thing is, Sakura started, unsure of herself, of what answer would escape her lips. In the past, she would have probably butted heads with Hinoka for what she would deem as interfering in her own personal business, but Sakura felt as if she genuinely needed this so that she could resolve this particular nagging issue regarding her life. She had felt like she had wanted someone to push her towards making this decision, answering this question, since Naruto himself was too kind and too selfless of a person to ask about what he was to her. As long as she was happy, that was all that mattered to him, and Sakura felt her heart grow warmer with affection towards her blonde teammate. And more so, she felt grateful towards the green-haired girl, for pushing her towards the right direction without confronting her directly or meddling in her business. Hinoka looked at Sakura pensively, awaiting the answer that would escape the girl's mouth, even if she had a feeling what she would say, when there was a sudden gust of wind and a third person appeared in the midst of the two pairs of people there. Said girl was hunched over with her hands on her waist, then when she got up from her crouched position on the ground, throwing her auburn hair backwards with the wind, Sanyu's face came into view. She was breathing a bit heavily, clearly exhausted from using the dance step twice to go back and forth from the village head's office, but slowly placed her hand on her chest as she regained her breath. Welcome back. Were you successful? Akako asked the girl, once she had managed to steady her breathing and relieve some of her exhaustion. Yes, Akako-san. Shizuka-sama says that Naruto-kun and Sakura-san are to go to her office immediately for immediate debriefing of their mission, Sanyu explained, with her hand raised towards her forehead as she had earlier before she had exited to go deliver the news to Shizuka. Really? The girl was too respectful, Sakura thought, as she watched her talking to Akako. However, she felt grateful to the girl for arriving when she did. A few seconds later, and Sakura thought she might have said something that would change her life forever. Her blonde teammate also felt a similar sense of relief to the arrival of the auburn-haired girl. His companion and new acquaintance had delved into a full-blown explanation regarding the village techniques and weapon techniques that were passed down in the village, and while Naruto himself found the techniques themselves amazing, he did not understand a single word of how the techniques worked. Naruto was a person who preferred actions rather than overly long explanations regarding the mechanics of how particular things worked. If Akako was actually demonstrating the techniques to him as she had with the dance step, Naruto would have probably taken a huge liking to the woman and wished to be taken as her number one student. The two Team 7 teammates walked simultaneously towards the village gate, awaiting Sanyu's guidance and escort on how to arrive at the office where they would meet with the issuer of the mission that they were currently on, when Sanyu immediately stepped before the two of them, waving her hands frantically. The blonde and pink-headed girl stopped, perplexed at the younger girl's sudden action, and Naruto's previously relieved expression turned into one of confusion. Beside him, Sakura folded her arms on her chest in exasperation, wondering what it was that had stood in their way this time. They had been delayed too long already, any more time wasted would probably not be taken kindly by Tsunade. What is it, Sanyu-san? Naruto asked politely, his tone of voice lighter than what he had earlier as he was talking to Akako. He knew that this girl was easier going than the red-headed girl behind him, so he felt no unease at all in talking to her. Sanyu smiled softly at him, and then lowered her hands, before saying, "You two aren't going to walk to the office. Shizuka-sama says that will draw too much attention from the villagers, plus it will ruin an activity that they are currently preparing for, so I will teleport the two of you into the village head's office directly. There she'll be able to talk to you in private and confidentiality." Thank you. These words ran through Sakura's mind after listening to what Sanyu had to say. It definitely did beat having to walk through unknown streets while looking for a place they had no idea of, and even if they had an escort, Sakura was not sure she would be extremely happy with the idea of all the eyes on the village focused on her and her teammate. She had a feeling that this would be the case even before they set one foot into the village, owing to Naruto's popularity within the walls of the village, so having found an alternative at this point proved to be a lifesaver for her. Besides, she added grumpily in her thoughts, she was not sure she would be comfortable knowing that other girls and women were leering at her teammate, plus knowing him and his knack for being unable to read the situation, he would probably be eager to return all their attention with smiles and waves. This would cause screams of delight in the village and exclamations of joy, and Sakura was not ready for such an event even before they had made it to Shizuka's office. Naruto turned to Akako, who looked at him curiously as he stared at her a bit uneasily, before he opened his mouth and said, "Well then, I'll see you later, Akako-san. Take care." The red-headed girl widened her eyes in surprise at Naruto's outright honesty and polite nature, but she waved at him with her spear in her hand, before saying, "You too, Naruto-san. Good luck in your mission." With that, the ruby-eyed woman turned her back to the group, and walked till her position on the left part of the gate, her spear in hand, prepared to resume her duties. Beside Naruto, Sakura gulped a little as she realized that she did not want to go through with what Naruto had done. Of course, she could have easily ignored Hinoka and have Sanyu teleport them there and then, but well, it would definitely leave a bad taste in her mouth, after witnessing Naruto's outright display of courtesy to the woman that he had been engaged in conversation with earlier. Reluctantly, she turned her head to meet the green-haired girl, who looked at her with the same expression she had even as they had their conversation earlier. Hinoka had caused Sakura quite some emotional turmoil as she caused the girl to think about things that she had not thought about in a while, things that would change everything in her life if she decided to confront them. The pink-haired girl had not expected to encounter something like this on her first mission in a while with Naruto, so she felt a bit resentful towards Hinoka. Still, that did not stop her from managing to smile at the woman, with all the honesty she could muster, and said, "Well, then, this is it, Hinoka. I'll be going now." The green-haired woman smiled at her in return, a bit surprised that the girl did not use honorifics with her name even after referring to her with it for the first time since they made their encounter. Still, she could not be bothered less. She didn't particularly care whether people addressed her with respect or not, viewing such a matter as mundane, so she replied to Sakura, "Sure thing, Pinky. But I have the feeling we'll be seeing a lot of each other really soon." Sakura raised an eyebrow in surprise at the woman's last statement, but decided to ignore it as she stepped forward to latch onto Sanyu, preparing to be teleported to their destination. She latched onto the woman's shoulder, her teammate latching onto the opposite one, and in a flash they were gone. The feeling was almost similar as to when Naruto had combined with Minato on the battlefield and used the Flying Thunder God to teleport everyone out of Obito's barrier and away from the tailed beast balls that he had been preparing to launch at the allied shinobi forces to decimate them completely. It was like you were being carried by someone through the air while all the oxygen was sucked out of your lungs. Still, the feeling was only momentary, as minutes later, Sakura felt her feet hitting a wooden surface. Opening her eyes after shutting them due to the sudden force she had felt from the teleportation, she found herself looking at a small desk that was standing towards the end of the wall of the wooden building they were currently in. The desk was empty, and Sakura wondered where the one they were supposed to meet was. However, she thought to herself, this was it then. She realized that they had arrived at their destination. She looked at her teammate who was on the other side of Sanyu's body, and his face looked pale. Well, this was to be expected. It was Naruto's first time traveling through such a technique, and Sakura herself had to admit she felt a bit sick after being teleported like that. He lowered his head, then immediately covered his mouth with his hand. The pink-haired girl became concerned about Naruto's well-being, so she immediately rushed to him and began patting his back, in an attempt to relieve him. After a few seconds of Naruto making some gurgled sounds with his mouth as he threatened to vomit the contents of his stomach onto the floor beneath them, he removed his hand from his mouth, and Sakura was relieved to see that he had not thrown up anything at all. Still, she kept her hand on his back, rubbing it up and down to make sure that he was perfectly okay and he wasn't just faking being strong for her sake. It wouldn't be the first time such a thing had occurred, the pink-haired girl thought, with a slight pang of guilt in her heart. "I'm okay, Sakura-chan. I don't feel sick anymore," her blonde-haired teammate said to her, after he had finally managed to straighten up his body. It was the first time he had talked to her ever since they had been on the outskirts of the village, and Sakura felt a bit odd regarding this fact. "You sure? You were never really mindful about your body during situations like this," the pinkette said, her hand never leaving the small of his back. She was still not thoroughly convinced that he was perfectly okay. I'm okay. Look." Naruto spoke up, bringing his hand to his chest and hitting it lightly to prove that he was okay. Sakura braced herself for him to begin spilling his guts anytime soon, but after seeing that nothing came out, she heaved a sigh of relief and released her hand on his back. "Well, it seems like it," Sakura said. Then at that point she had a voice that did not belong to the girl that had teleported them here. Speak up. The voice held a tone of authority and experience, the same voice that her master and Hokage, Tsunade-sama, used when speaking to the villagers and handing out orders or affirming praise to them. Good work, Sanyu. I'll handle things from here. Sakura and Naruto slowly turned their heads towards the source of the voice, and their eyes came to rest upon a woman that was seated on the sill of the window that let air into the room. The room itself only had 2 windows, on both opposite sides of the room, and each window allowed for a full view access of what went on in the streets of the village. Sakura saw that one could see the villagers walking around from the open-air view that was offered by the window where the woman was currently seated on. So that's why there was no one seated at the desk she had seen earlier, Sakura realized. The dark-haired woman, whose hair was swaying with the wind from the window she was seated at, slowly turned her head, and like that, emerald eyes met emerald eyes, and finally, Haruno Sakura had come face to face with the person she had been eager to meet ever since she heard her name mentioned in Tsunade's office. Plus the word, marriage, accompanying it, and her teammate's name mentioned in the midst of all that confusion. Shizuka herself was quite an attractive woman, but being the epitome of beauty as she was in the village, she did not like confining herself to her desk all day and handle tedious documents. Sometimes, she loved taking a seat at the window sill, where she would have a full view of the villagers and whatever activities they were in. Surprisingly, this helped her to settle down more within the office and carry out her duties more diligently, since seeing the villagers bubbling with joy and bursting with life managed to make her happy. After she had accepted her title as village leader fully and decided not to run away from what she truly wanted to do, thanks to her encounter with a certain blonde boy, Shizuka had truly come to appreciate what a beautiful thing it was to live, and to be alive. She would forever be grateful to Uzumaki Naruto for handing her a new lease on life, and with that the ability to enjoy it to the fullest. So it was with that feeling of joy in her heart, both from seeing the villagers going on with their lives as peacefully as they had always done, and from seeing the man that had made it all possible, that she got off the window sill she had been seated on, and walked towards Naruto. Naruto was a bit surprised to see her walking towards him, but as soon as she had reached him and spread her arms wide, did Sakura finally understand what she was planning to do. The dark-haired woman wrapped Naruto in a hug. Her arms encircled his bigger, firmer ones and enclosed themselves at his back, and Shizuka pressed her head to Naruto's chest, in a position where she could hear his erratic heartbeat. Sakura was astonished at this display of affection, and as she could see the woman's face since she had turned her head in order to have her ear next to Naruto's heart, Sakura realized that she had a smile on her face. She looked so happy being in that moment, that time with the blonde boy in her arms, and Sakura felt a crushing sense of defeat in her heart. Shizuka seemed to care for Naruto almost as much as Sakura did, and was not afraid to show him just how much she had missed him ever since they had parted ways on that port all those years ago. However, Naruto found he lost for words the umpteenth time that day. First there was the situation with Akako at the village gates, and now there was this. As the shorter, dark-haired woman wrapped her hands around him, Naruto found him unable to find a way through which he could respond to this action. Well, true enough, he had been hugged before unexpectedly by a girl, none other than the apple of his eye, who was in that room with him at that very moment, but at that time, he had found himself lost for words and his eyes widened in surprise as he was finally receiving a hug from the girl of his dreams, who he had dreamed of hugging ever since the first time he had laid eyes on her all those years ago in the academy. She had hugged him so tenderly after first punching him for being too reckless after his fight with the Akatsuki leader, Pain, and Naruto awkwardly let his arms flay freely on his sides as he found himself unable to respond. Thinking about it now, he had never quite asked Sakura why she had chosen to hug him there and what she meant by that. Now, here in the present, he had been met by an equally appalling situation, finding himself in the arms of a woman that he had encountered by accident all those years ago on an island that they had gotten off to restock on supplies. True enough, he had disliked the woman's approach on how she was supposed to handle her life by living by the rules of the village that she did not even like herself, but after being able to talk sense into the woman, he had come to take a liking to her and found himself not minding meeting her once more in his life. This was it then, Naruto thought. He had probably been given another chance to encounter his acquaintance from back then, but still, he did not understand why she had chosen to hug him. So Naruto let his arms remain enclosed in Shizuka's embrace, and smiled brightly at the woman, who had looked up into his blue eyes and found him staring back at her warmly. This caused Shizuka to further melt into her bubble of happiness, and she realized that she would probably not mind staying like that for a longer period of time. Reality can be quite harsh though. Sakura cleared her throat a bit too harshly next to the two shinobi, clearly irate by the manner in which Shizuka had chosen to lash herself onto Naruto, seeing it as a quite bothersome act. However, she found herself smiling inwardly at the fact that Naruto had not responded to her hug in any manner, or even chosen to comment anything about it. Somehow this made her feel a bit better since she thought that there was nothing more between Naruto and Shizuka than mere friendship. However, a woman's intuition was a powerful thing, and Sakura decided to keep her guard up in case Shizuka decided to make any more moves on Naruto. The green-eyed girl released Naruto from her embrace, and then looked over at the emerald-eyed girl that was with her in the room at that moment. She looked at her curiously for a while, realizing by the affectionate way in which Naruto had referred to her earlier that this was the girl who he had admitted to loving when he was trying to talk her out of looking for a loveless marriage. Shizuka realized that Haruno Sakura was quite an attractive woman, and could see why Naruto had fallen for someone as pretty as her. Still, that couldn't be the only reason that Naruto was in love with her, since he wasn't a shallow man so much as to love a woman because of her looks alone. No, there was so much more to Haruno Sakura than just her dashing looks, something more that had caused Naruto to fall head over heels for her, and Shizuka was determined to find out what it was in the short time that she and her blonde teammate were going to be in Nadeshiko.